Exactly at 12 a.m., while I was standing pressed behind the second-floor curtain of my neighbor's house, the back door of my home opened. My daughter-in-law stepped out first, her hands trembling as she clutched a thick stack of papers. Behind her was a man I had never seen before, tall, wearing a dark coat, carrying an old leather briefcase. They didn't exchange money. They exchanged documents. Then the two of them quietly walked toward the shed where my husband had worked for 30 years. My heart began to race because they thought I was hundreds of miles away. But the truth was, I had never left this town. And in that moment, I understood. They weren't just betraying me. They were preparing to erase me from my own life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I had to grip the windowsill just to stay upright. My knees were shaking, not from the cold, but from a raw, primal fear rising from deep in my stomach. In the dim light spilling from the back porch, I could see Natalie's walk clearly. I had watched that walk for 8 years, since the day she entered my home in a pure white wedding dress, holding my son's hand. I knew every small movement she made, and I knew that when Natalie walked that slowly, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clenched tight against her chest, she was doing something she didn't want anyone to see. The man walking behind her sent a chill through me. Not because he looked dangerous. On the contrary, he looked completely ordinary. Too ordinary. Tall, thin, gray-haired, wearing a dark coat that was old but clean, and a leather briefcase worn at the handle, the kind I used to see carried by lawyers or bank employees back in the 1990s. That ordinariness was what terrified me, because it said one thing clearly. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't reckless. This was something carefully prepared. They stopped in front of the shed. That shed. God. My heart tightened when I saw that old wooden door. My husband, Harold, had built it with his own hands. For 30 years, every weekend he was in there, fixing the lawnmower, building wooden shelves, making small things for neighbors. It was where he escaped the world, where he turned on AM radio to listen to the morning news and drank strong black coffee. When Harold died, I kept the shed locked for almost a year. I couldn't bear to step inside it alone. And now Natalie was using that very place to meet a strange man at midnight with stacks of documents in her hands. I turned away and leaned my back against the cold wall of Howard's living room. Howard Klein, the neighbor who had lived across from me for more than 20 years. If it hadn't been for him, I don't know what would have happened to me that night. It was Howard who had told me in a low, unusually serious voice, "Lorraine, if you want the truth, you have to see it with your own eyes. Some things can't be explained." And he was right. Before standing here, trembling behind the curtain like a thief, I had still been trying to convince myself that maybe I was overthinking things, that maybe old age had made me more sensitive, that maybe Ethan and Natalie were just going through a difficult phase, and I, like so many other mothers, was exaggerating everything in my head. But the feeling that my home was no longer safe had been clinging to me for weeks. It didn't come from one big event, but from very small things. Things that, if I described them, people might laugh and say I was paranoid. But I had lived 63 years. I knew when a house began to change the way it breathed. Before, I woke up every morning at 6 a.m. I made coffee in an old glass pot, one Harold had bought years ago at Sears. Ethan usually came into the kitchen a few minutes after me, hair still messy, smiling and saying, "Morning, Mom." Natalie came down later, usually after 7 a.m., neat, lightly scented with perfume. We used to have quiet but comfortable breakfasts. Then everything changed. Ethan started coming down later. Some mornings I didn't see him until I had already finished cleaning up. Natalie began whispering to Ethan in the living room. Every time I walked in, the conversation stopped immediately. Ethan looked down at his phone. Natalie smiled, a smile so stiff it felt like a mask. I started noticing my son's eyes. He no longer looked straight at me the way he used to. He avoided my gaze, as if he were afraid I might read something there. And then there was the room, my old bedroom with Harold. After he passed, I had cleared it out, leaving only a few memory boxes and a wooden cabinet. That room had always been open, until one day I realized the door was locked. At first, I said nothing. I just stood there, my hand resting on the cold lock. A new lock, not the old one. "Oh, that room?" Natalie said when I asked. "We locked it because it's damp, Mom. We didn't want your things getting moldy." Her voice was too quick, too smooth, as if she had practiced the answer. I nodded, but inside, a cold stone dropped. Then there were the nights I heard noises. Not loud, not clear. Just soft footsteps, a door opening and closing. Some nights I heard the faint sound of a suitcase rolling across the wooden floor. When I stepped into the hallway, everything was silent, as if nothing had happened. I began to wonder if I was imagining things. That was why the idea of pretending to visit my sister came to me. It made me feel both ashamed and relieved. I hated lying to my son, but I hated even more the feeling of being pushed aside, treated like someone no longer clear-headed enough to understand what was happening in her own home. I told Ethan and Natalie I was going to Spokane to visit my sister for 1 week. I kept my voice casual. I even joked that I needed a change of scenery. Their reaction made my heart tighten. Ethan looked up too quickly. His eyes lit up for a split second. Then he caught himself. Natalie smiled. A wide, bright smile, far bigger than necessary. "That's wonderful, Mom," Natalie said. "You should take a little rest." Ethan nodded again and again. "Yeah, Mom. We'll take care of everything here." The way he said everything kept me awake all night. I packed my suitcase in front of them. I called my sister right there in the living room. I let them hear me talk about bus times, about how long I'd stay. I played the role of a slightly scatterbrained old mother so well that even I felt uncomfortable. Ethan insisted on driving me to the bus station. He wanted to be sure I left. I let him drive me. I hugged him. I looked into my son's eyes, the eyes I had looked into since the day he was born, and I saw no guilt, only urgency. I didn't get on the bus. I waited until Ethan left, then took a taxi back. Howard was already waiting. He didn't ask many questions. He just opened the door, led me upstairs, and pulled the curtain closed. "You need to see," he said again. And now I was seeing. Natalie and the man had gone into the shed. The door closed. A dim light turned on inside, shining through the dusty window. I saw shadows moving. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw Natalie hand the stack of papers to the man. He flipped through each page, nodding slowly. That wasn't the scene of a cash exchange. That was the scene of an agreement. A naked fear squeezed my chest. Not fear of losing money, not fear of being used, but something deeper, darker. The fear of being erased, decided for, treated like a burden that needed to be handled. Howard stood behind me in silence. I knew he was seeing the same thing I was. The first night I watched my own house gave me my answer, and it was more horrifying than anything I had imagined. I stood there long after the light in the shed went out completely. Howard gently touched my shoulder, reminding me that I was still breathing, still standing in his quiet living room, not trapped in a nightmare. I nodded, pulled the curtain closed, and sat down in the old armchair. My hands were ice cold, but my mind was burning. Dozens of questions flooded in, none fully answered. I knew only one thing. What I had just seen could not be separated from my past, from that house, from the life I had spent decades building. Harold and I met when we were very young. I was just in my early 20s, working part-time at a small-town library. Harold was an electrician, always smelling faintly of metal and machine oil. He didn't talk much, but every word was solid. We weren't rich, we never were, but we knew we were building something lasting. When we bought the land, it was just an empty lot, patchy grass, wind blowing straight through. Harold held my hand, pointed ahead, and said, "This will be our home." The house was built little by little. There were summers when we lived in a half-finished place, eating dinner at a temporary wooden table, surrounded by the smell of paint and insects. I remember every detail. The staircase Harold built himself, the third step that creaked slightly, the living room window frame set a bit crooked because it rained hard that day, the back porch where we drank tea every afternoon. 40 years passed, and that house became more than shelter. It was a witness to every stage of my life, from giving birth to Ethan, sleepless nights holding a baby, to quiet evenings when my husband and I had grown used to silence. When Harold died, it felt as if the house lost its voice. He was gone after a stroke, so fast I had no time to prepare. One morning, he was in the shed fixing an old radio. By evening, he was gone. I lived in that house like a shadow for almost 2 years. I didn't clean the shed. I didn't touch his clothes in the closet. I just moved through familiar rooms, trying not to touch the empty spaces. It was during that time that Ethan began staying over more often. At first, a few nights a week. Then gradually, he said he and Natalie wanted to move in with me. Ethan said I shouldn't live alone anymore. Natalie said the house was big enough that 3 people would make it warmer. I remember that night clearly, sitting across from me at the dining table, warm yellow light overhead, voices soft and caring. I looked at my son and saw the boy I once walked to school, the child I sheltered from rain. I didn't think of calculation. I had one simple thought: family should be together. At first, it truly was peaceful. Natalie woke up early to make breakfast. She always asked what I wanted to eat or drink. Sometimes she baked apple pie and placed it in front of me, saying it was her mother's recipe, but she wanted me to try it first. Ethan fixed the fence, replaced light bulbs, painted the north wall Harold had planned to do but never finished. When I spoke about my husband, Ethan listened closely. Natalie nodded, placed her hand over mine in shared sympathy. I believed them, completely. Some evenings, the 3 of us sat watching television, talking about nothing important. I told Natalie old stories about the house, every corner, every memory. She listened, asked questions, remembered. I felt relieved thinking the house wouldn't be abandoned, that it still had laughter and warmth. I even thought maybe this was how Harold stayed with me, through our son and his small family. But the warmth slowly changed, so gradually I didn't notice at first. There were no arguments, no harsh words, just tiny shifts. Natalie started rearranging things without asking. Familiar items were moved. Once I couldn't find the wooden box Harold made for me. Natalie said she'd put it in storage to keep the house tidy. I nodded but felt a quiet loss. Ethan was home less in the evenings. He said work was busy. When he was home, he sat on his phone replying quickly, then putting it away when I walked in. I didn't ask. I thought I should respect his privacy. Natalie stayed gentle, but her smile was no longer natural. She cared for me in a very proper, very correct way. So correct that sometimes I felt less like a mother and more like someone being managed. I still believed, because I didn't want to think otherwise. That may have been my greatest mistake. I didn't realize that, little by little, I was being pushed to the edge of my own home. No one said it outright. No one told me to stay out of the way or be quiet. But small decisions were made without me. Conversations happened when I wasn't there. Doors closed softly behind my back. I had opened the first door to all of this with trust, a mother's trust, that her child would never harm her. That care was genuine, not a disguise. Sitting in Howard's living room that night, I saw it clearly. That 40-year-old house wasn't just being used for something I didn't understand. It had become the stage for a play where I, the true owner, had been written out of the leading role long ago. After that night, I could no longer go back to being someone who didn't know, even though I still didn't see the whole picture. I sat quietly in Howard's living room, listening to the steady ticking of the wall clock, like a borrowed heartbeat. Outside, the night wind moved through bare maple trees, brushing against the glass. I told myself to stay calm, that what I'd seen might only be part of something. But the more I tried to reassure myself, the more I remembered the small signs that had been there all along, like tiny cracks in a glass cup I had pretended not to see. I remembered the first time conversation stopped when I appeared. It was a Sunday afternoon, light rain falling, the kind that covers a town in gray mist. I had just come back from church, still holding the service program. When I walked into the living room, I heard Ethan and Natalie talking. Low voices, urgent. I caught only a few scattered words like paperwork, an appointment, and then silence. Natalie turned, smiling far too brightly, asking if I wanted tea. Ethan bent down to tie his shoes as if he'd dropped something. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling like I'd stepped into a room everyone wanted to lock before I entered. After that, the pattern repeated. I stepped into the kitchen. Whispers vanished. I walked into the hallway. The topic changed to weather or food. What frightened me wasn't the silence, but the coordination, as if they'd practiced, as if there was an unspoken rule. When Mom's here, don't talk. The phone, too. I wasn't the type to snoop. I even found it a little funny how younger people glued themselves to screens. But Ethan, he was my son. I knew his breathing, his expressions when he was worried, happy, or hiding something. Some mornings, he sat at the breakfast table scrolling fast. When I walked in, he flipped the screen down or shoved it into his pocket, reflexively. If it were work, he wouldn't need to hide it. If it were personal, he wouldn't react. Like that. That hurried motion looked like someone caught doing something wrong. I asked casually once, keeping my voice light. "Is something going on, Ethan?" He looked at me, smiled faintly, said, "Nothing, Mom. Just small stuff." But his eyes wouldn't settle. He looked past me, down at the table, out the window, anywhere but at my face. That avoidance kept me awake at night. I had given birth to him, held him through fevers, watched him learn to walk and write. I knew how clear those eyes once were, and now they looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like I was in the way, not a mother. And then, the storage room. My old bedroom with Harold, the room I'd turned into a place for memories, suddenly became forbidden. The door wasn't just closed, it was locked, a new lock, shiny and cold under my fingers. I remember the feel of that metal, like touching an invisible boundary that had just been built inside my own home. When I asked, Natalie answered too quickly, "That room's damp, Mom. I was worried your boxes might get moldy." The explanation sounded reasonable, on paper. But words, no matter how polished, still have a smell. With Natalie, it smelled like haste. She wasn't speaking like someone concerned. She was blocking a door. I tried to be reasonable. I told myself maybe the room really was damp. Maybe I'd overlooked something. But the more I thought, the less sense it made. I had lived in that house for 40 years. I knew which corners were damp, which stayed dry. I knew where the winter wind came from. I even remembered replacing the double pane windows last year to prevent condensation. And most of all, if they truly cared about my things, they would have talked to me first, asked what I wanted. They had no right to lock part of my house, let alone change the lock. Once at noon, when Natalie was out shopping, I tried opening the door with my keys. None fit. I stood there, listening to the useless clinking, then let my hand fall. My heart pounded, not with anger, but with the quiet realization of being stripped of authority. As if no one needed to hit you or yell, changing a lock was enough to say, "You're no longer in charge here." The nights that followed became a stretch of nights when I slept without truly sleeping. I lay in my room with the bedside lamp dimly lit, listening to the sounds of the house the way people listen to breaking news. There was the soft creak of the wooden floor in the hallway, the sound of a door opening and then closing. Some nights, close to 11 p.m., I heard a very distinct sound, the rolling of suitcase wheels across the floor, very light, as if someone deliberately lifted it whenever they passed over a spot that might creak. I sat upright, my heart pounding, listening. Part of me wanted to step out immediately, turn on the lights and confront them. But another part, the part that had lived long enough to understand how cruel people can become when they are cornered, held me back. I was afraid I would step out and be met with that look of pity, the kind people reserve for an old woman who imagines things. I was afraid Natalie would smile gently and say, "You must have heard wrong, Mom." I was afraid Ethan would sigh as if I were bothering them, and most frightening of all, I was afraid they would know I was paying attention. So I stayed still. I blamed myself. I scolded myself for becoming suspicious because of my age, for reading too many stories online about ugly family situations. I told myself that the suitcase sound was probably just Natalie rearranging things, that the footsteps were probably Ethan going to the kitchen for water, but every time I tried to explain it away, a very clear feeling surfaced, one I could not silence. A mother's instinct. That instinct doesn't speak in words. It feels like a stone sitting in your stomach, cold and heavy. It makes you look at a smile and sense something beneath it. It makes you hear the words, "I'm fine," and know with certainty that things are not fine. With Ethan, I had felt that instinct when he was a child. Just hearing his breathing was enough for me to know he was about to get a fever. I trusted that instinct more than any doctor's words, and now that instinct was screaming that something was seriously wrong. I began to observe every detail carefully, but I did it the way a woman does who has learned that silence can be a form of survival. I stopped questioning. I stopped asking, "What are you two talking about?" I simply listened and remembered. I started noticing what time Ethan came home. I noticed when Natalie muted her phone. I noticed the days they seemed especially eager to send me to bed early. I even noticed the smell in the house, the frequent presence of new cleaning products, as if they were trying to erase traces of something. Some mornings I saw the outdoor trash bin much fuller than usual, as if a large amount of paper had been thrown away. Other days I watched Natalie carry a large bag out to the garage, walking quickly, her shoulders tense. I heard the rustling sound of paper envelopes. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew one thing. Important things were being moved, stored away, hidden. I began to feel like I was living in my own home as a guest. No one told me to leave. No one said anything cruel. But each small sign, the conversations cut short, the disappearing phone, the avoiding eyes, the new lock, the suitcase sounds at night, was enough to slowly kill my trust. Trust doesn't collapse from a single blow. It dies from hundreds of needle pricks. And when trust dies, the truth becomes sharp as a blade. Tonight, after seeing Natalie meet a strange man with documents in the shed, all those small fragments suddenly fit together into a picture I didn't want to see. I didn't dare say it out loud because even admitting it made my throat tighten. I looked out the window once, more, even though I knew the light was off, even though I knew I would see only darkness and still trees. Howard stood beside me, his voice low. "You see now, Lorraine. You weren't imagining it." I nodded slightly, because from that moment on, I understood I had crossed a line. I was no longer just a mother hoping for peace in old age. I had become a woman who had to protect herself, with wide open eyes, a sharp memory, and a cold patience I never thought I possessed. I didn't take my eyes off my house for the rest of that night. After the light in the shed finally went out, Natalie returned to the house through the back door, her steps quicker than when she left, as if she wanted to erase her own tracks. The door closed very softly, almost without a sound. Then everything sank into silence. Silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I thought it might have been a one-time thing, that somehow, in a way I didn't yet understand, it would end there. But my instinct, the same instinct that had robbed me of sleep for weeks, would not allow that hope. I stayed there behind the thin curtain, waiting, like a night watchman guarding my own home. And then I saw them. Close to 10 p.m. the next night, a gray sedan pulled up in front of my house. The headlights turned off immediately. 2 people stepped out, a young woman and a man in his 40s. They didn't speak loudly. The woman pulled a medium-sized suitcase, its wheels rolling over the stone walkway. The man wore a backpack, the straps pulled tight across his chest. I recognized that kind of luggage immediately, not for a short dinner visit, but for an overnight stay. Natalie opened the door before they even rang the bell. That sight made my stomach tighten, not because it was unexpected, but because of how smoothly it happened. No hesitation, no questions. Natalie smiled, tilted her head, greeting them like a host accustomed to guests. They exchanged a few brief words. I couldn't hear them, but I saw the gesture clearly. The man pulled out his wallet, took out a few neatly folded bills, and placed them in Natalie's hand. She didn't count them. She simply nodded and stepped aside, signaling them to enter. Cash. In that moment, all doubt inside me turned into something heavy and undeniable. This wasn't paperwork. It wasn't a personal connection. It wasn't a casual visit. It was cash. And Natalie accepted it with a practiced motion. Howard stood beside me, breathing quietly. I didn't turn to look at him, but I knew he was seeing the same thing. The suitcase was pulled into the house. The door closed. The living room curtain shifted slightly, then went still. A while later, I saw the light come on in the upstairs hallway. Then the light from the locked room inside the house, not the shed, the room that had once been my bedroom. I covered my mouth with my hand, not because I was about to cry, but because if I didn't, I was afraid I might scream. I had lived in that room for nearly 30 years. I knew how the light spilled from the window when the lamp was on. I knew the position of the fixture, the angle of its glow. There was no mistaking it. Strangers had been led into the room I no longer had a key to. The room that held the last things Harold left me. the room I believed I was protecting by never entering it again. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I returned home before Ethan and Natalie woke up. Howard offered to come with me, but I shook my head. I needed to feel the house with my own body. I needed to see what everything looked like when daylight erased the shadows of the night before. Everything was perfect. The living room was tidy. The kitchen was spotless. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air. Natalie stood by the stove, her hair neatly tied back, wearing a light-colored sweater. She turned and smiled at me gently, just like every other day. "Good morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" The question made my throat go dry. I nodded and answered in a voice that surprised even me with how calm it sounded. Ethan came down the stairs, adjusting his sleeves, greeting me as if nothing had happened. No sign of unease, no tension, nothing at all. The strangers were gone. No suitcase, no backpack, no noise. The locked room sat silent, as if no one had ever stepped inside. I sat at the table, took a sip of coffee, felt the familiar bitterness spread across my tongue, and realized a cold truth. They were very good. So good that if I hadn't seen the night before with my own eyes, I would have believed everything was my imagination. Ethan talked about his work for the day. Natalie asked if I needed anything from the grocery store. They played their roles perfectly, frighteningly so. I looked at my son, the child I once believed could never lie, and understood this. They weren't hiding just one thing from me. They were living two lives under the same roof. I went back to Howard's house that night, and that night I saw them again. This time it was a different couple, a younger man with a large backpack and a blonde woman pulling a small suitcase. Natalie greeted them at the back door. Again, cash. Again, the nod. Again, the locked room. The nights that followed blurred together into an endless chain. Strangers arrived. Luggage went inside. Money changed hands. Lights turned on and off. And every morning, everything returned to normal with chilling perfection. Ethan remained the dutiful son, asking if I wanted him to fix the loose stair step. Natalie remained the attentive daughter-in-law, folding towels, wiping counters, asking about my health. I understood they were acting, and I understood that if I shattered that performance now, I would be the one who lost. Confront them? I had thought about it, many times. There were moments watching Natalie take the money when I wanted to run out of Howard's house, cross the street, pound on the door and ask, "What are you doing in my home?" But I stopped myself, not because I was weak, but because I was clear-headed enough to understand the danger. If I confronted them without proof, they would deny everything. They would say, "I heard wrong, saw wrong." They would use soft voices and concerned looks to turn me into a delusional old woman. And if what they were doing was bigger than what I had seen, if behind those rented rooms there was something more, then revealing my suspicion could make them change their plan, or worse, speed it up. I needed evidence. Not one piece, not one night, but a chain that couldn't be denied. I needed to know how long they had been doing this, how many people were involved, and how they were using my house. I needed to understand the entire play before pulling back the curtain. And so, I chose silence. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was strategy. I began memorizing times, memorizing faces, memorizing car colors, suitcase sizes, the way strangers walked. I remembered how Natalie always took the money with her left hand. I remembered that Ethan was never present when the money changed hands, but always appeared calm the next morning. Every sleepless night brought me closer to the truth. I was no longer a woman sitting in the kitchen waiting for her children's care. I became an observer, quiet, patient. I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, but I also knew one thing: that 40-year-old house, my life, and the honor of my late husband could not be sold off in silence, and I would not allow it. I stood by Howard's window long after the last car left that night. Streetlights cast a dull yellow glow onto the wet pavement. My house, seen from across the street, looked brutally peaceful. Howard pulled a chair closer and placed a cup of hot tea in front of me. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. Some truths need to be spoken slowly, or they knock you to the ground. After a while, Howard finally spoke. His voice was rough and slow, as if each word had been carefully weighed. "Lorraine, I've actually been noticing this for weeks." I turned to him. The warm light in the living room made Howard look older than usual. The wrinkles around his eyes seemed deeper, not from age, but from worry held in too long. I wasn't surprised to hear him say that. I just wasn't ready for how clear the truth had become. Howard said that at first he thought he was just too idle, a widower living alone, spending more time at the window than necessary. He noticed cars parking in front of my house at night, then brushed it off. Probably friends of the kids, he thought, or someone stopping by late. But the cars kept coming, always after 9 p.m., often around 10 p.m., sometimes later. What made him suspicious was the pattern. Never during the day, never loud laughter or bright lights like normal gatherings. Everything was quiet, discreet, as if someone didn't want to be seen. And the people stepping out of the cars were never the same. Howard said he remembered clearly. Some nights it was a young couple pulling 2 large suitcases. Other nights it was a middle-aged man with a backpack. Sometimes 2 women speaking in accents that didn't sound local. But no matter who they were, they all had one thing in common: luggage. Always luggage. Not small handbags, not gifts, but what people bring when they plan to stay overnight. I started wondering, Howard said slowly, why people would come to your house at that hour with luggage like that and then disappear by morning. He looked at me, as if checking that I was still listening. I nodded, my throat burning. I had seen it myself, but hearing someone else confirm it still felt like a hammer striking my head. Howard admitted there were many nights he had stood exactly where I was standing now, looking through the curtain, watching Natalie open the door before guests even rang, watching her smile and usher them in, watching suitcases roll up the path, watching the door close quickly. "Your daughter-in-law," he said without malice, only truth, was always the one greeting them. I never saw Ethan do it. That matched everything I had observed. Natalie was the one in control. Natalie set the rhythm. Ethan stayed in the background. That division of roles sent a chill through me. It showed this wasn't impulsive, it was intentional. Howard said he had wrestled with himself for weeks. He didn't want to interfere in someone else's family. He was afraid of being seen as idle or suspicious. "You know," he said softly, "at our age, it's easy to be labeled as imagining things. I didn't want to worry you unless I was sure." I understood that better than anyone. I had labeled myself that way just to keep living in false peace. But then one night, Howard paused, took a sip of tea, as if steadying himself. He said that night was colder than usual. He was awake with insomnia, and he saw something that erased all doubt. Natalie opened the door, as usual. A man stepped in, pulling a suitcase. But before going inside, the man stopped and pulled out his wallet. Howard saw clearly because the porch light was on. Bills were taken out, folded, and placed in Natalie's hand. She took them, quickly tucked them into her coat pocket, and led the guest inside. There was no more doubt after that. Howard said, "No one hands over cash like that just to visit friends." When he said that, I closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't need him to continue, but he did, because some truths need to be spoken to be undeniable. He said that from that moment on, he knew my house had been turned into something else. No longer a family home, but a place of transactions, a place of exchange, an illegal boarding house operating in silence. I opened my eyes. I wasn't as shocked as I expected. There was no spinning, no collapse. Instead, there was a strange stillness, as if part of me had known this answer for a long time and simply hadn't dared to name it. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "Thank you for telling me." Howard shook his head. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." I looked at him and saw not curiosity or judgment in his eyes, but the guilt of a good neighbor. I knew he owed me nothing. I, too, had chosen silence for too long. When Howard said the words, "illegal boarding house," it didn't surprise me. It only completed the picture. The sleepless nights, the suitcases, the cash, the locked room, everything fit together in a terrifying way. I thought of Harold's room, of his belongings being touched and used by strangers who didn't know who they belonged to. A sharp pain pierced my chest, but it didn't break me. It sharpened me. I told Howard I wasn't surprised. He looked at me, slightly startled. I gave a sad smile. "I felt it for a long time," I said. "I just didn't want to believe it." We sat there in the small living room, listening to the night. No one spoke for a while, but in my mind another thought, heavier than the rest, began to take shape. If they dared to turn my home into an illegal rental, if they dared to take cash from strangers under my roof, then what else was happening that I hadn't seen yet? I had seen enough to know this wasn't something small, but deep down I also knew that the nights of renting out rooms were only the surface. There was something behind those stacks of papers I saw in the shed, something tied to the urgency, to the way Natalie controlled everything, to the way Ethan avoided my eyes. I looked at my house again through the window. It stood there, silent, like a mute witness to everything happening inside. I wasn't shocked to learn it had been turned into an illegal boarding house. I had prepared myself for that truth, even if I didn't want it. But I also understood something that weighed even heavier on my heart. When people are willing to do something that wrong, they rarely stop there. I knew, very clearly, that something worse was waiting ahead. And I also knew that from this moment on, I had no choice but to face it, even if the cost might be everything I had ever trusted. The next morning, when the sunlight just brushed the edge of the kitchen windowsill, I knew it was time to take another step, not a step back, a step into a different role. I sat at the dining table, my hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, trying to keep my voice as normal as possible when I said the sentence I had prepared all night. "I think I'll go visit my sister for a week." The words dropped into the quiet space like a small stone tossed into a still lake. Ethan looked up first. Natalie stopped folding towels. In a very brief moment, so brief that if I hadn't been watching them closely, I would have missed it, I saw something flicker. Not worry, not surprise, but relief, almost happiness. "Really, Mom?" Natalie asked, her voice slightly higher than usual. "Is she doing well?" I nodded. "She is. She's called a few times already, saying it's been too long since we last saw each other." Ethan set his coffee cup down and smiled at me. "You should go. A change of scenery would be good. Staying home all the time gets boring. Boring. The words sounded so light, as if this house were no longer a place that belonged to me. I watched them more closely as we talked. Natalie asked how many days I would be gone, how I was traveling, whether she should prepare food in advance. Ethan nodded repeatedly, occasionally adding things like, "You deserve a rest," or "We'll take care of the house." Every word was polite, perfectly appropriate. But that very perfection made my skin crawl. There was no hesitation, no questions like, "Are you okay traveling alone?" or "Should I go with you?" They wanted me to go, and they didn't hide it well enough. That afternoon, I took my old suitcase out of the closet. The brown one worn at the corners, the one Harold and I used for long trips. I placed it in the middle of the living room, opened it, and began packing. I did it slowly, deliberately. I wanted them to see. I wanted every shirt, every pair of socks placed inside the suitcase to say clearly, I am about to leave. Natalie walked past a few times, always wearing that gentle smile. "Don't pack too much, Mom. It's just a week." She spoke like a caring daughter-in-law. Ethan brought me a jacket, saying the evenings at my sister's place might be colder. I took it, thanked him, and kept packing. Inside, something ached. Not because they were helping me, but because they were helping too quickly, too eagerly, as if they were politely pushing me toward the door. That evening, I picked up my phone and called my sister. In truth, I called the voicemail of an old number I knew no one answered anymore. I spoke loudly enough for them to hear. I laughed, asked how she was doing, said I would be leaving in the morning, said I missed her. I even pretended to debate which jacket I should bring. Natalie stood in the kitchen, Ethan in the living room. They listened, and I knew that in their minds, everything was going exactly according to plan. The next morning, Ethan offered to drive me to the bus station. "I'll take you. It's easier that way," he said, sounding relieved. I nodded, pretended to hesitate for a moment, then agreed. Natalie helped carry my suitcase to the car. She hugged me, patted my back, and said, "Have a safe trip." That hug had no warmth. It felt like a ritual. On the way to the station, Ethan talked about small things, work, the weather, traffic. I watched my son through the rearview mirror. He focused on driving, occasionally glancing at me. There was nothing that looked like concern from a son seeing his mother off. Only carefully hidden impatience. At the station, Ethan parked and took my suitcase out for me. He stood there and hugged me again. "Call me when you arrive," he said. I looked into his eyes. For a brief second, I wondered if he felt any guilt. Then he turned away, as if he couldn't stand my gaze for too long. "Of course," I said. I walked into the station, pulling my suitcase behind me. I passed the ticket gate. I didn't look back. I knew that if I did, I would see Ethan standing there, waiting for me to board, not out of worry, but to make sure I truly left. I sat on a bench, watching the bus prepare to depart. Once Ethan had been gone long enough, I stood up, pulled my suitcase toward the back exit of the station. I didn't get on the bus. I went outside, flagged down a small taxi, and gave the address I had known by heart for many years, Howard's house. When the taxi stopped at the gate, Howard was already waiting. He looked at me with an expression that held both concern and resolve. I pulled my suitcase inside, closed the door, and in that moment I felt as though I had crossed a line I could never return from. I was no longer a passive mother waiting to see what her children would do next. I had chosen to stand on the other side, the side of the truth. From the upstairs room in Howard's house, I could clearly see the front door of my own home. I set the suitcase down without opening it. I didn't need my belongings. I needed my eyes and my memory. That evening, as night fell, I saw Natalie open the door. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Strangers arrived. Luggage went inside. Money changed hands. Everything happened faster, more naturally than on previous nights, as if they were certain I was truly gone. Their caution disappeared, replaced by the ease of people who believed no one was watching. I stood there, memorizing every detail, the timing, the number of people, the type of luggage, the way Natalie held the money, the way Ethan appeared afterward, calm, as if he had just come home from a normal work day. I didn't write anything down. I stored it in my mind. I knew my memory was still very good, better than they thought. The second night, the third night, I stayed there. I became a witness to my own home. Each night I saw another piece of the picture, and each piece made me more certain that what they were doing wasn't just about money. In that silence, I began preparing my counterattack, not with rage, not with a sudden confrontation, but with cold patience. I needed to understand the entire play before pulling back the curtain. I needed to know how far they had gone and how much farther they planned to go. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't tired. There is a kind of clarity that appears only when you know you are standing at a major turning point. I felt it clearly with every breath. I had left the house, in name only. In reality, I was coming back stronger than ever. On the third night after I had left town, I began to see the entire picture that had previously appeared only in fragments. My house was no longer operating like a family home. It had shifted into a different rhythm, cold and precise, like a machine that had been carefully oiled. Couples arrived so regularly that I could predict it. Usually after 7 p.m., when the sky began to darken and the surrounding houses turned on their lights, the first car appeared. Some nights it was a black SUV, other nights a silver sedan, sometimes a rental car with company stickers still on it. No one stayed more than one night. No one came back a second time. But the common thread never changed. They always brought luggage, and they always arrived with the cautious air of people who didn't want to be recognized. Natalie greeted them like someone completely accustomed to it. She didn't need to check her phone or look at the clock. She knew exactly when they would arrive. The door opened before the bell rang. I saw her smile, not a polite smile, but the smile of someone in control. She tilted her head, said a few brief words, then held out her hand. Cash was placed into her palm. No receipts, no questions, just smooth, unspoken understanding. I had never imagined Natalie could do this so skillfully. She led the guests inside, guided them up the stairs, opened the door to the room I had once called the safest place of my life. I saw the light turn on inside, spilling through the window exactly as I remembered. But now it illuminated unfamiliar faces. They set their suitcases down on the floor, sat on the bed where I had once lain beside Harold, where I had held his hand through long nights of illness. Ethan appeared later. He was never there when the money was exchanged. He always came home like a normal husband, a normal son, taking off his jacket, hanging it up, stepping into the kitchen. But then he did small things, very small things, that made his role clear. He carried extra towels upstairs. He checked the water heater. He reminded Natalie to lock the back door. Everything happened quietly, in sync, without a word needing to be explained. One night, I saw Ethan standing in the upstairs hallway speaking to a pair of guests. He smiled, nodded, pointed toward the bathroom. That gesture made my chest tighten. That was my son, playing the role of a hotel employee in the house I had spent my entire life building. I began to count, not because I cared about the money, but because I needed to understand the scale of this betrayal. For each couple, I saw Natalie take about $50 to $60. Some nights there was one couple, some nights two. On weekends, more. 3, even 4 groups. I calculated silently, number by number, the way one counts heartbeats when they know something is wrong. In a single weekend night, they could make more than $200. In a week, close to $1,000. In a month, the number jumped to a level I didn't want to think about. Thousands of dollars. Money, earned by using my house, my utilities, and worse, by violating my most sacred memories. Every time the bedroom light came on, I thought of Harold. I remembered the way he used to place a book on his chest when he dozed off. I remembered the steady sound of his breathing in the quiet night. And now, those sounds were replaced. Suitcase wheels, hushed voices, doors closing. It felt like someone was walking muddy shoes across a carpet I had spent my life protecting. The pain didn't come all at once. It accumulated. It settled in layers like dust on furniture. And then, without my noticing when it happened, that pain transformed into anger. Not loud anger, but cold anger. The kind that made my hands shake as I gripped the window railing. The kind that forced me to bite my lip to keep from bursting out of Howard's house, crossing the street, and pounding on my own front door. There were moments when I stood up abruptly. I turned, ready to go down the stairs. In my mind, I saw myself standing in the living room, looking straight at Natalie and Ethan, asking a single question. "What do you think you're doing in my house?" I imagined their faces when exposed, the panic, the confusion, maybe even pleading. Then Howard placed his hand on my arm. "Don't," he said quietly, but firmly. I turned to him, my eyes burning with anger. "They're humiliating me in my own home," I whispered. "I can't just stand by and watch." Howard shook his head slowly. "I know, but you have to look carefully. If you confront them now, they'll deny it. They'll say it's just a few friends. They'll twist the story until you're the one who seems overly sensitive. And if they're doing this, there's a good chance they're doing something else too." That last sentence stopped me cold. I looked back at the house. Natalie stood in the kitchen, laughing with a newly arrived couple. Ethan carried extra blankets upstairs. Everything ran smoothly, like a system that had been operating for a long time. Howard was right. This wasn't the moment to explode. This was the moment to observe, to remember, to accumulate. I needed to know how far they had gone. I needed to know whether what I was seeing was the bottom or just the surface of something darker. I sat back down and took a deep breath. The anger was still there, burning in my chest, but I forced it to settle, turning it into something else, sharp focus. I told myself every night they hosted guests was a night they left traces. Every dollar they took was evidence, and every memory violated was a reason I could not afford to soften. My house had been turned into a secret hotel, but I hadn't lost it. Not yet. I was still here. I could still see, and I could still remember. I thought I had already seen the worst. I believed that turning my home into a secret hotel, making money from rooms filled with memories, was the lowest point of betrayal. But I was wrong. Some truths don't reveal themselves on their own. They wait to be spoken at the right moment by someone brave enough to break the silence. Howard told me that story on a gray afternoon, with light rain falling on the porch outside. We sat in the kitchen, each holding a cup of tea that had gone cold without either of us noticing. I was still thinking about the night before, about the last pair of guests leaving my house near dawn, when Howard cleared his throat. There was something heavier than usual in the sound. "Lorraine," he said slowly. "There's something I haven't told you." I looked up. In his eyes, I saw the hesitation of someone who had kept something hidden for too long. My instinct, once again, began pounding in my chest. Howard said that about 2 weeks earlier, before things were as obvious as they were now, he'd been sitting at the small cafe near the post office. It was a place he went every Thursday morning, ordered a cup of black coffee, and read the newspaper. That day, he hadn't been paying much attention until he saw Natalie walk in. Natalie wasn't alone. She sat down across from a man Howard had never seen in town. The man looked to be around 50 years old, neatly dressed, wearing a dark jacket, his hair carefully combed. Most important of all, he carried a thick briefcase, the kind people don't bring just to have a casual coffee. Howard hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the cafe was small, and they weren't speaking very quietly. At first, he heard scattered words that didn't seem alarming. Paperwork, procedures, timing. Then he heard words that made him lower his newspaper. Legal capacity. Howard repeated the phrase to me slowly, as if he himself didn't want to believe what he had heard. I felt a chill run down my back. He said Natalie leaned toward the man, lowered her voice, and mentioned something about a mental evaluation. The man nodded, opened the briefcase, and pointed to several pages. Then Howard heard another phrase, one that nearly stopped my heart when he repeated it. Nursing home. I don't remember how I reacted in the seconds that followed. I only remember the cold spreading along my spine, as if someone had poured ice water over me. Those words weren't random. They don't appear in casual conversation. They are the language of law, of planning, of calculation. Howard said he sat there, heart racing, afraid to turn his head and look directly at them. He worried that if they realized he was paying attention, the conversation would stop. But he heard enough to know Natalie wasn't talking about anyone else. She was talking about me. She needs to be evaluated. Howard recalled Natalie's voice, calm, without emotion. Just to be sure. She's not young anymore. Howard didn't hear every detail, but he heard enough to know it wasn't an innocent conversation. When Natalie stood up, the man closed the briefcase, nodded, and they left the cafe, together. Howard sat there for a long time afterward, unable to take another sip of his coffee. I didn't know what to do, Howard said, his voice rough. I was afraid I'd heard wrong, and I was afraid if I said something without being sure, I'd scare you. I didn't blame him. Because if I had heard that story from someone else, I might have asked myself the same question. Was I imagining things? But now, with all the pieces laid side by side, the locked rooms, the papers I saw at night, the way they pushed me out of the house, everything became brutally clear. The house wasn't just a source of income, it was the target. And I was the obstacle. My throat went dry. Are you sure? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Howard nodded. I'm sure I can't forget those words. That very night, I called Rebecca. Rebecca is my lawyer and also an old friend from when I worked at the city library. Her voice on the other end of the line was as calm as ever, but when I told her what Howard had overheard, I sensed a very slight change in her breathing. Lorraine, Rebecca said after a brief silence, if they're discussing legal capacity and a mental evaluation, this is more serious than you think. She explained it to me, without rushing, without trying to scare me, but every word felt like a knife cutting through my last remaining illusion. At my age, all it takes is one unfavorable medical evaluation, even one that's manipulated or misinterpreted, and a court can consider appointing a legal guardian. And if that guardian is Ethan, your assets, Rebecca said plainly, could be legally controlled. The house, the bank accounts, medical decisions, everything. I gripped the phone tightly. But I'm completely clear-minded, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not incompetent. I know, Rebecca replied, and that's exactly why you have to act early. Because if they move first, if they build a file, prepare paperwork, create evidence, then you'll be the one who has to prove you're competent instead of them having to prove you're not. That sentence made the full danger crystal clear. This wasn't a sneaky money-making scheme anymore. This was a reversal of power. Once the legal wheels start turning, they don't stop easily. Natalie is very smart, Rebecca continued. And if she's working with someone who understands the law, someone carrying a briefcase, then they're not thinking about just a few $1,000s in room rentals. I sat silently, listening to the rain hit the window. In my mind, the image of Natalie taking cash from guests suddenly seemed small, almost trivial. That was only the first step, a way to generate money, a way to prove they were managing the house effectively, a way to prepare for something much bigger. They want my life, I said quietly, almost to myself. Rebecca didn't deny it. Yes, she said. They want control of everything, legally. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. There was only a deep stillness like a frozen lake. I thought of Ethan, the son I had raised, trusted completely. I thought of Natalie, the woman who had entered my family with a gentle smile. And I realized the most painful part wasn't that they wanted money. It wasn't that they were violating my home. The most painful part was that they had planned to erase me from my own life through legal, cold, methodical means, without leaving any visible trace of cruelty on the surface. I stood up and walked to the window, looking toward my house. The lights were still on. Normal life was still going on inside, but I knew that from this moment on, I couldn't hesitate anymore. Because once people start talking about legal capacity and nursing homes, it's no longer a family matter. It's a fight for the right to exist as yourself. I didn't sleep at all that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was painfully clear. Rebecca's words echoed over and over, each sentence like a cold stone dropping onto an already frozen lake. If they moved first, if they prepared enough paperwork and enough evidence, I would be pushed into a position where I had to prove I was still myself. That thought made it impossible for me to sit still another day. The next morning, when Ethan left early for work and Natalie drove out to go shopping, Howard looked at me and, with just a nod, understood what I was about to do. I didn't say it out loud, but we both knew. It was time for me to face the place they believed I would never dare to touch, the shed behind the yard, the place where Harold had spent the last decades of his life fixing small things, building bookshelves for me, and storing tools he could never bring himself to throw away. I walked across the grass, still wet with dew, my heart beating hard but steady. The shed key was still on my old key ring. At least that gave me a small sense that they hadn't managed to replace everything yet. The door opened with its familiar creak. The smell of old wood and machine oil filled my nose, carrying a warmth of memory I didn't have time to indulge. Dim light filtered through the small window, just enough for me to see the old wooden shelves, Harold's workbench, and something that did not belong there at all. A gray metal safe, placed neatly under the table. I froze for a few seconds. My heart pounded harder, not from surprise, but from the cold confirmation of suspicions that had clung to me for weeks. I stepped closer and bent down. The safe wasn't locked. Maybe they were in a hurry, Or maybe they were too confident that no one else would come in here. I opened the safe. Inside was cash, more than I expected. Bundles of bills neatly tied with rubber bands in various denominations. I didn't count carefully, but a single glance was enough to know it represented many nights, many weeks, money earned from my house, my room, my memories. Nausea rose in my throat, but I forced myself to keep going. Beneath the cash was a thick stack of documents. I took them out and placed them on Harold's workbench, where he used to set his coffee cup every morning. The first folder made my hands tremble, a short-term rental contract. The address was my house. The owner was clearly listed, Ethan. My son's name sat boldly on the line marked owner, like a knife driven straight into the last trust I was still trying to hold on to. I turned the next page. In the notes section, there was a small line of text that made it hard to breathe. Ownership transfer in progress, pending court ruling. Transfer, pending ruling. I set that stack down, took a deep breath, and continued. There was another file, clipped separately with a light-colored cover. On it were words that made my blood run cold. Capacity evaluation. My name was printed clearly. My age. A scheduled evaluation date. The assessment section. Blank. But at the bottom of the page, there was already a doctor's signature. A doctor I had never met. That signature sat there like a forged certainty waiting to be legalized. I flipped the page. Another sheet slid out, a price quote from a place with a very gentle-sounding name, Evergreen Haven, a nursing home, private room, full-time care. The cost was printed boldly at the bottom, a number so high I had to look twice to make sure I wasn't mistaken. Everything had been calculated. They had chosen where to confine me, priced out the rest of my life the way one selects an item from a catalog. My legs felt weak, but I didn't allow myself to sit down. I knew I had to keep going while I still could. At the bottom of the stack was another document, a full power of attorney. My name was already printed under grantor, Ethan's name under agent. Only one thing was missing, my signature. The line was blank, glaringly white. I could picture the moment they were planning, me signing it while not fully aware, then waking up to realize I had handed everything over myself. A small piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. I picked it up, my hands shaking violently. It was a handwritten note, in Natalie's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The lines were short, clinical, chilling. It mentioned a sedative, dosage, timing, before the evaluation. No further explanation was needed. Everything was painfully clear. I stood there for a long time, listening to my heart pounding in my chest, as if it were reminding me that I was still alive, that I still had the right to decide. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. For a moment, I wanted to burn everything, to erase every trace of this plot, but I knew that wasn't my path. I took out my phone. Every document, every page, every line, I photographed them all. I made sure the lighting was clear, the signatures sharp. I photographed the safe and the cash inside it. I didn't miss a single detail. Each click of the camera felt like reclaiming a piece of control that had been stolen from me. When I put everything back in place, closed the safe, and shut the shed door, I stood still for a moment longer. A light breeze moved through the yard. The house ahead looked as peaceful as ever. But I knew that from this moment on, there was no room left for hesitation. I had seen everything. I had touched the evidence. And I understood with absolute clarity there was only one path forward. Not the path of an impulsive confrontation, not of pleading or hoping for a late awakening. It was the path of truth, revealed at the right moment, in the right way, to protect me from the very people who had planned to erase me from my own life. I left the shed with a strange calm, not because I was no longer afraid, but because fear had transformed into something else: cold clarity. Once you face the evidence head-on, there are few choices left: collapse or stand up and move forward. I chose the second. That same afternoon, I called Rebecca. It wasn't a panicked call. I spoke slowly, clearly, straight to the point. I told her I had found everything: the cash safe, the contracts, the mental evaluation files, the unsigned power of attorney, the note about sedatives. On the other end of the line, Rebecca was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was no longer gentle as usual. It was sharp and steady, the voice of someone who had seen enough to know exactly what needed to be done. "Lorraine," she said, "we act now. Not one more minute of waiting." That evening, Rebecca arranged for me to see an independent doctor, someone with no ties, no connections to my family. The appointment was discreet but serious. I answered every question, completed every test, not to prove I was normal, but to create a record that could not be twisted. When the doctor signed the certificate confirming my legal capacity, I felt as if I had reclaimed a piece of territory that had been silently occupied. Rebecca didn't stop there. She immediately drafted revocation documents, revoking any and all powers of attorney, present or future. Any document that might have been signed before, if any existed, was rendered invalid. Everything was notarized, stamped, and properly filed. I signed each page, my hand steady. Every signature redrew a boundary. Then came the will. Rebecca asked if I was sure. I nodded. No tears, no hesitation. We revised the will that very night. Everything was written clearly, transparently, leaving no room for vague interpretation. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it for safety, for truth. And because I had come to understand that once family becomes a tool, it is no longer family. When all the paperwork was finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Now," she said, "we plan the counterstrike, not to scare them, but to end this." The plan was simple, and that simplicity was exactly what made it effective. I would return home. I would play the role of a mother back from visiting her sister, tired but content. I would change nothing. No suspicion, no probing questions. I would let Ethan and Natalie continue believing everything was unfolding exactly as they had planned. "We don't drag them into the light yet," Rebecca said. "We let them walk into it themselves." I understood. When people believe they're about to win, they become careless. The next evening I went back home. I pulled my suitcase across the threshold, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. The door opened quickly. Natalie stood there, her smile flawless, her eyes lighting up in a way I had once mistaken for joy. Now I knew. It was relief. "You're back," she said sweetly. "How was the trip?" "Good," I replied, smiling just enough. "She's the same as ever, loud but warm." Ethan appeared behind Natalie, looked at me, and nodded. He took my suitcase and placed it neatly in the corner. There were no probing questions, no scrutiny. They trusted me, trusted that I was still the woman they believed they could guide. In the days that followed, I lived exactly as before. I woke early, made coffee, read the paper. I asked Natalie if she needed anything from the store. I smiled when Ethan talked about work. I didn't mention the locked room. I didn't bring up the shed. I even appeared a bit more tired, as if the trip had drained me. Everything flowed so smoothly that sometimes I had to remind myself this was a performance, and they didn't suspect a thing. On the contrary, they seemed more confident. I noticed it in the brief whispers they no longer bothered to hide as carefully. In the way Natalie proactively asked if I wanted to schedule a routine health checkup. In the way Ethan talked about arranging things so Mom wouldn't have to worry so much. Those words in another context might have sounded like care, but I knew exactly what they were. They continued their plan. I knew the date and time, not because they said it outright, but because of the pieces I already had, the appointment schedule in the files, the note about sedatives, the half-veiled comments. I knew the evaluation would happen on a weekday morning. I knew they would choose a time when I was usually most groggy. I knew they had already prepared the script, from taking me there to explaining everything to outsiders. And I let them believe they were about to win. I let Natalie make me tea every evening. I let Ethan remind me to go to bed early. I even pretended to forget small things. My keys, my reading glasses, just enough to reinforce the image they were trying to build. Not too much, just enough. Meanwhile, everything Rebecca had prepared was quietly waiting for the right moment. Documents had been filed, records sealed. The people who needed to know knew. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to run. I just needed to stand still and let the truth do its work. Some nights I lay in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Harold. I wondered what he would say if he could see me now. He probably wouldn't say much. He would just place his hand over mine the way he used to and tell me I was doing the right thing. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not because the danger had disappeared, but because I had stopped avoiding it. Ethan and Natalie believed they were very close to the finish line. They believed everything was within their grasp. I let them believe that, because some traps only work when the prey walks in wearing a victorious smile. That night came sooner than I expected. Not because time moved quickly, but because everything had already been set in place, waiting only for the final moment to collapse. As darkness settled, the porch lights turned on as they did every evening. I sat in my room with the door slightly ajar, clearly hearing the familiar rhythm of life downstairs. Natalie moved around the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes touching. Ethan went up and down the stairs, checking locks, checking light switches. They didn't realize that this very professionalism had become the most vivid evidence against them. There were more guests than usual. I recognized it immediately from the first sounds. Not just one couple, then a second, then a group of three. The sound of suitcases rolling across the tiled porch came one after another, each time making my heartbeat slow by one beat, not from fear, but because I knew I was nearing the end. Natalie greeted them as always, her voice just friendly enough, just discreet enough. I heard soft laughter, brief greetings. Money changed hands. I didn't see it, but I didn't need to anymore. I had seen it too many times. The house was full of guests. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. This was exactly the moment Rebecca had talked about. The moment they felt most confident. The moment they believed no one was watching them anymore. And then the doorbell rang. Not the familiar chime, not the short, cautious press of a renter. This sound was firmer, longer, as if the person outside wasn't asking for permission. Natalie froze. I could clearly hear her footsteps stop in the middle of the living room. Ethan came down the stairs faster than usual. I heard his voice call out, trying to stay calm. "Yes." "Who is it?" A man's voice answered from outside, low and clear. "City Inspector, please open the door for a lodging inspection." Just one sentence, but it was enough to freeze the air inside the house. I stood up, not rushed, not shaking. I adjusted the light jacket on my shoulders and took a deep breath. I didn't step out right away. I let them open the door. I let them face the truth before I appeared. The door opened. I heard shoes stepping inside. Not just one person, at least two. The inspector's voice sounded steady and professional, without emotion. We've received reports of illegal short-term lodging activity at this address. Natalie smiled, a smile I knew all too well, but this time it didn't quite hold together. "There must be a mistake," she said. "This is a private residence." The inspector didn't argue. He simply turned to a younger man and gestured. The man pulled out a camera. "May I ask," the inspector continued, "who are the people present here tonight?" The air went silent for a few seconds. Then a stranger's voice spoke up, a middle-aged man standing near the sofa. "I rented a room here. I paid by the night." Natalie spun toward him. "You?" But it was already too late. Another woman spoke, sounding confused. "We were referred here. We paid cash when we arrived." Sentence by sentence, like bricks falling from the fake wall Natalie and Ethan had built. None of the guests knew they were becoming witnesses, but the truth doesn't need staging. It only needs the right questions. The inspector nodded and took notes. Then he turned to Ethan. "Are you the homeowner?" Ethan opened his mouth. No sound came out for the first second. Natalie stepped forward, trying to regain control. "They're just friends staying over. There's no business going on." The inspector looked straight at her. "Then please explain why multiple unrelated individuals are here with luggage and have confirmed paying for lodging." No one could answer. "We need to inspect the rooms." The inspector said it like a formality, but I knew, and they knew, it was the end. Doors were opened, one room at a time. My old bedroom, the bed not yet made, a suitcase at the foot of the bed, guests' personal items scattered in the bathroom, the next room, two people. One of them ended a phone call abruptly. The last room down the hall, sheets still damp. The camera clicked repeatedly. Pens scratched on paper. There was nothing left to deny. And that was when I stepped out. I walked down the stairs slowly. Each step was a year of my life in this house. I entered the living room, where all eyes immediately turned to me. I stood straight. "Hello," I said calmly. "I am the legal owner of this house." The inspector turned to me immediately. "You confirm that you did not authorize any rental activity here?" "I have never authorized it," I replied, "and I only just learned about this." Natalie went pale. Ethan turned toward me, eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time in his life. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't look at him. I looked at the inspector. "I am prepared to provide all documents proving ownership." The inspector nodded. He didn't need any further explanation. The report was written on the spot. Illegal lodging operation, cash payments, no registration, no permit, multiple violations at once. The guests were instructed to leave within 30 minutes. Some were angry, some confused. Some silently pulled their suitcases out of my house, fading into the night like shadows. I stood still, watching each person cross the threshold, people who had never belonged there. When the door closed for the last time, the living room felt painfully empty. The inspector handed Ethan and Natalie the citation. The number printed on it made Natalie grab the back of a chair. "You will receive further summonses for follow-up proceedings," he said. The door closed behind them. Silence, no guests, no roles to play, no place to hide. Natalie turned toward me, her voice breaking. "Mom, I can explain. I think tonight is enough," I said gently but firmly. "The game is over." Ethan collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Natalie stood frozen like an actor who had forgotten the final line. My house was quiet again, but not the way it used to be, because the truth had been spoken, publicly, in front of everyone. And from that moment on, no one in this house could pretend it had never happened. The door closed behind the inspectors, leaving a silence so heavy I could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. Ethan still sat there, head bowed, shoulders slumped as if he had aged 10 years overnight. Natalie stood by the dining table, hands clenched together, lips pale, eyes with nowhere left to hide. I was the one who broke the silence. "Ethan," I said my son's name slowly, without raising my voice. "Look up at me." He lifted his head. In his eyes there was no more calculation, no more confidence of someone who thought he was in control. Only the panic of a child caught doing something unforgivable. "How far were you going to take this?" I asked. "Turning my house into an illegal hotel, preparing paperwork to declare me legally incompetent. And then what? Putting me in a nursing home so you could finish signing everything else?" Ethan trembled. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "You did," I cut him off, my voice strangely calm. "You did, because everything was prepared. The capacity evaluation files, the full power of attorney, even notes about sedatives." Natalie broke down sobbing. "I just wanted things to be easier," she said, her voice shattered. "She's old. She can't manage anymore. We were just—" "Stop," I said, turning to look at her for the first time that night. There was no rage in my eyes, only deep exhaustion. "You have no right to decide my life, and you certainly have no right to drug me to get my signature." Natalie collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Ethan began to cry out loud, not the kind of crying that begs for mercy, but the sound of someone realizing they've crossed a line they can never undo. I looked at my son for a long time. I remembered holding him as a baby, his first steps in this very living room, the nights I waited up for him when he studied far from home. That love didn't disappear, but it was damaged, permanently. "You will leave this house," I said, "within this week." Natalie looked up, horrified. "Mom, there is no mom right now," I replied. "This house is no longer safe with the two of you in it." Ethan nodded, not arguing. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he understood he had no right to demand anything. I continued, slowly and clearly. "I will not press criminal charges against you, not because I've forgotten what you did, but because I don't want the rest of my life tied to courtrooms and resentment." Ethan collapsed, sobbing. Natalie said nothing more. I didn't comfort them. I didn't insult them either. Some lessons don't need further explanation. A week later, the house was empty again. I changed the locks. I threw open the rooms that had once been locked. I took out Harold's belongings, cleaned them, arranged them, put them back where they belonged. I repainted the bedroom walls, changed the sheets, opened the windows to let the sunlight in. Slowly, the house began to breathe again, with my breath in it. I didn't live alone in bitterness. I lived more slowly. I replanted the small garden out back. I drank coffee on the porch every morning. I smiled at Howard when he came by, and for the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully without listening for strange noises in the night. Forgiveness didn't come immediately. It wasn't a decision made in one evening. It was a process. I learned to forgive, not to erase what happened, but to keep it from defining the rest of my life. I came to understand a simple but painful truth. Blind love is not love. It's a trap. And sometimes, to protect herself, a mother must learn to draw boundaries, even with her own child. I still love Ethan, but I no longer hand my life over to anyone. And if you've stayed with me to the end, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to the story of an older woman who learned to stand up late, but not too late. If you were me, what would you do if your own child tried to take your life away from you? Where are you watching this story from? Leave me a comment. I truly want to hear from you. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe so we can meet again in the stories to come. I'm grateful to you for your time, your empathy, and for bringing your heart here with me until the very end. That morning, I had no reason to leave the house, just a vague hunch that pushed me to grab my keys and drive to the old bank on Maple Street. As I walked in, I saw my daughter-in-law, Brianna, in a cream suit, talking to the branch manager. She was holding a stack of medical papers, her voice clear. She's no longer mentally competent. The doctor has confirmed it. I froze, as if every sound around me vanished. Then a cold truth slammed into my chest. She was plotting to take everything my husband and I had built over 40 years, but Brianna had no idea what I did next that morning would make her pay dearly for every lie. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Marjorie Hale, 69 years old, a widow for almost 7 years. I live in a small white house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where my husband Robert and I once planted rose bushes along the porch. My life is simple, steady: make coffee, read the paper, tend a few small cacti, then stroll the neighborhood. I never imagined I'd witness what I did that morning, my own daughter-in-law, standing in a bank, calmly burying my dignity and freedom with a stack of forged documents. Before I walked in, I thought I'd just stop by for a few minutes to check the savings we'd opened back when Robert was alive. I still prefer banking in person over online, partly because I like talking to real people, and partly because I can feel a little of our shared memories there. Everything seemed normal that day. Sunlight through the glass, the smell of coffee from the machine behind the counter, the receptionist's friendly smile. I had no idea that a few more steps would take me straight into a nightmare. I recognized Brianna immediately. She stood about 20 feet away, poised, blonde hair neatly pinned up, her voice crisp like a speech she'd practiced. Beside her was Mr. Jenkins, the branch manager I'd known for years. I used to send him a Christmas card every year. Today, he was listening intently, nodding along. I slowed down and slipped behind the divider between two teller counters. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Instinct kept me from moving closer. I heard Brianna continue, "We just want to make sure Mom's assets are protected. She doesn't recognize many family members anymore. Dr. Whitmore recommended we move forward with legal guardianship before there's a financial risk." I nearly stopped breathing. Dr. Whitmore? I've never seen any doctor by that name. A chill ran down my spine. Through the gap between the panels, I saw her open the file and present it to Mr. Jenkins, an obvious stamp, signatures, medical forms. She added, with practiced sympathy, "This has been very hard for us, but it's necessary." "We?" I repeated silently. "So Daniel knew about this too?" My son, the one who held me when his father died, who promised I'd never be alone now, silently letting his wife stage this entire con. The room went blurry, as if someone had sucked the air out of it. My heart pounded, my hands shook. I gripped my purse strap to steady myself. In my head, I heard Robert's voice, "Don't let anyone lay a hand on what you worked for." I took a deep breath. I couldn't just stand there. I stepped out. The flat heels of my shoes clicked sharply on the polished tile. Heads turned. Mr. Jenkins looked surprised. Brianna whipped around. For a second, her face went pale, then snapped into a fragile smile. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Her voice caught, stiff and unnatural. I straightened, clutching my bag. "I came to check my own accounts," I said, calm enough to surprise myself. "And you seem to be doing that for me?" The lobby's air went heavy. Mr. Jenkins glanced between us, clearly uneasy. Brianna tried a smile. "Oh no, you've misunderstood. I was just making sure everything's safe. The doctor said you've been—" I cut her off, firm. "I've never seen any doctor named Whitmore. And I haven't authorized anyone to handle my finances. It seems we have a serious mix-up here." Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat and turned to Brianna. "Miss Brianna is Mrs. Hale, correct?" Brianna faltered, looking down at the folder, then up again with a shaky smile. "There must be a misunderstanding. I was just trying to get things ready in case she gets confused." My voice dropped harder. "Confused? Like confusing my actual signature with this one?" I held out my hand for the documents. Sensing something wrong, Mr. Jenkins passed them over. I flipped through quickly, and within seconds I saw it. The signature was fake sloppy strokes missing the distinctive pull I've used my entire life. My pulse jumped. I looked Brianna dead in the eye. "You forged my signature!" Her lips quivered. She forced a laugh. "No, Mom, maybe a teller." "Don't call me Mom," I said, ice cold. "Someone trying to bury me alive while I'm still breathing doesn't get to call me that." The lobby fell silent. The young receptionist froze behind the counter. "Mr.?" Jenkins looked down at the file in my hands, then said more sternly, "Mrs. Hale, I think we should pause this process and verify everything." I nodded, never taking my eyes off Brianna. She swallowed and stepped back, clutching her purse. I saw her gaze wobble, her confidence peeled away. I stepped closer, low enough for only her to hear. "You just signed your own sentence, Brianna." I turned to Mr. Jenkins. "Crisp. Please freeze every account tied to my name and anyone other than me. I'll provide proper identification today." He nodded immediately and signaled a staffer. While he did, Brianna mumbled something incoherent and hurried out, her steps leaden. As the glass door closed behind her, I stayed put. My body shook not from fear but from a cold, steady anger that felt almost like calm. I knew everything had changed. I walked out with the file in my down hand and crossed the lot. Sunlight flashed off the hood, making me squint. I sat behind the wheel and gripped it tight. My heart still hammered, but I knew I'd just secured the first weapon in a fight they didn't realize they'd started. The drive home felt longer than usual. Cold air slid in through the cracked window, carrying the piney scent of the old neighborhood. In the rearview mirror, I saw my own face, tired but not weak. A woman who'd lost a husband and lived with loneliness can endure a lot, but she will not be declared incompetent so someone else can steal what she built. And I knew that morning was only the beginning. If Brianna thought I'd sit quietly while they erased me, she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Never come for a woman you think is frail when she still remembers every number, every signature, and every secret in the bank. Driving home that morning, Brianna's words kept echoing. "She's no longer mentally competent." The sentence cut through me like a dry, cold blade, and years of memories came rushing back, vivid enough to hurt. I remembered the first day Daniel brought Brianna home. She was in her early 20s, then soft blonde curls, a bright smile, confidence shining in her eyes. I saw my younger self in her, quick, lively, full of spark. Daniel held her hand and looked at me with hope. "Mom, this is the person I want to spend my life with." I smiled, genuinely happy. After years of Daniel burying himself in work, I just wanted him to find someone who made him happy. We held the wedding in the backyard where Robert and I had planted lavender and climbing roses along the white fence. Brianna wore a simple lace dress, glowing in the sunday. I told my best friend that day, "I feel lucky Daniel found a daughter-in-law who's educated and well-mannered." Back then, everyone adored her. Polite, attentive, socially smooth. Family members said, "Your daughter-in-law is a gem." I felt proud, lucky even. Life stayed peaceful until Robert died. After the funeral, the house felt frighteningly empty, the laughter, doors opening, morning greetings gone. Daniel visited often, and a few weeks later, it was Brianna who suggested, "Mom, why don't we move in with you? The house is big, and I can take better care of you." I was surprised, touched. Not many people these days choose to live with their mother-in-law. I asked, "Are you sure?" "I don't want to be a burden." Brianna smiled, touching my shoulder. "Not at all, Mom. We want to be close." I believed her. I believed the way mothers do when they want to see the good in their children. So they moved in. At first it was pleasant. Brianna woke early, made breakfast, asked if I wanted tea or coffee. She called me Mom, in a sweet, sincere tone that made it hard not to respond. Evenings, the three of us ate together, talking about work, neighbors, and memories of Robert. Sometimes I'd look at Daniel's smile and feel a rare peace. "You can rest now, Robert." Brianna even encouraged me to get out more. She signed me up for a senior yoga class nearby and bought me a new teal sweater. One fall evening on the porch, I told stories about the old days when Robert and I started our tiny accounting office. Daniel leaned on his wife's shoulder, smiling. The warm porch light over the three of us made me think I'd found home again. Then, like all things too good to be true, the changes crept in. It started small. One night, when I went to pay the electric bill, Brianna said, "Mom, let me do it. I'm used to these websites, no risk of typing something wrong." She sounded reasonable. I nodded, help is help. A few weeks later, she said, "Let me reorganize your financial papers, Mom. I can consolidate accounts so they're easier to track." "Everything's online now." I hesitated, but Daniel chimed in. "Let Brianna handle it, Mom. She's great at this." She studied finance. So I gave her the file cabinet key, then, little by little, my online banking passwords. All because I trusted that a daughter-in-law helps her mother-in-law. At first, she reported every expense. She printed statements, left them on the kitchen table, even used pink sticky notes. Plumber, $85. Car insurance, $140. I appreciated the neatness. I even told a neighbor, "I'm so lucky my daughter-in-law handles everything. I don't have to worry." I didn't realize I was cutting the last thread between me and my autonomy. Time passed, and the help became habit. Every new bill, "I'll handle it, Mom. You rest." Then she started retrieving my bank mail. She said, "Mail's mostly ads now. I'll screen it first, saves time." I nodded, unconcerned. I trusted too much. One morning I checked the mailbox earlier than usual, empty. Brianna stood in the kitchen holding a few envelopes. She flinched when I walked in, then forced a smile. "I was going to bring these up for you." I smiled back, not suspecting a thing. Daniel got busier out early, home late. Brianna ran the house, meals, finances, repairs, taxes. I felt like a guest in my own home, but told myself, the kids want to help. Nothing wrong with that. Late one night, trying to confirm a routine checkup, I found my bank email password had changed. I asked Brianna. She smiled. "I updated security." "Don't worry, I saved everything." I nodded, though something felt off. I pushed the doubt away. But the truth is, every time I gave up a small bit of control, I handed Brianna a bigger piece of power. I remember New Year's Eve when I wanted to donate to Robert's favorite charity. Brianna stopped me. "Mom, wait until the new year. We've got lots of expenses at the end of the month." I stayed quiet. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had to ask permission to use my own money. Only when I sat in that bank and saw her holding papers with my name stamped on them did I realize this had been set up for a long time. Every small step, every sweet word, every dutiful gesture, just a polished cover for a scheme I helped enable. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was knowing I'd smiled and opened the door for the betrayer to walk right in. I don't know exactly when things went off track, but the smallest details always spoke first. One morning I checked the mailbox like usual. I love flipping through a paper or two, a few envelopes, sometimes a postcard from an old friend. But that day, it was empty, just a torn ad. I figured the mail was late and forgot about it. The next day and the next, same thing. I asked Brianna, "Have you seen my mail?" "It's been a week, no bills or notices." She answered lightly, "They probably switched to electronic, Mom. I set that up so nothing gets lost." I nodded, it made sense. But when I asked for statements or forms to sign, she said, "Don't worry, I printed everything. I'll hold on to it so it doesn't get misplaced." Soon, nothing arrived at my address. Even thank you letters from charities I'd supported for years disappeared. I chalked it up to the Times everything online now. Only when I saw a new bank card did I pause. One afternoon, Brianna walked in, beaming. "Mom, the bank sent you a new card." They upgraded their security and reissued everyone. She held it up, then added casually, "Let me keep it for you since you tend to leave your wallet in your coat." I hesitated, then let it go. She'd been paying bills for months after all. I smiled and nodded. She slipped the card into her own wallet like it already belonged there. I started to feel out of control without knowing why. Then the doctor's appointments. I've kept regular checkups every 6 months since Robert passed. I called to confirm my slot, and the nurse sounded surprised. "Mrs. Hale, we got a message from your family to move it to next month." I froze. "From my family? Who called?" She said, "A woman named Brianna Hale. She said you were tired and needed more rest." A tightness caught in my throat. I'd never authorized that. When I asked Brianna, she smiled, too gentle to be angry at. "I thought you forgot. You said you weren't ready that day, so I rescheduled." I shook my head. "I don't remember saying that." She laughed. "You've had a lot on your mind." That answer, which sounded harmless, kept me up all night. I began to realize that whenever something seemed off, Brianna always had a soft, reasonable explanation, so reasonable it made me doubt myself. Daniel, my son, seemed more distant by the day. He used to ask, "Did you sleep well, Mom? Do you need my help with anything?" Now it was different. He came home late, and dinner was usually just two women sitting across from each other. When I asked him, "Have you noticed I'm getting less mail lately, or that my doctor's appointments keep getting moved?" He brushed it off. "Brianna's probably handling that for you. She's good at this stuff." His voice was flat, not a hint of concern. I looked at my son and felt my throat tighten. Did he not know, or did he choose not to? Then one day, I stumbled onto something I couldn't talk myself out of. That afternoon, I went to the bank alone to take out some cash for a gift for my granddaughter. The teller I knew pulled up my account, looked at the screen, and said, "Would you like to confirm the transfer from last Tuesday?" I frowned. "Last Tuesday? I didn't make any transfer." She turned the screen toward me. A receipt for a transfer of $2,800 to an account under the name Hale Consulting LLC. I'd never heard of it. At the bottom was my signature, or more accurately, a clumsy version of it. My skin prickled, my heart raced. I asked for a printed copy and took it home. That evening I showed it to Brianna and asked, "What is this?" "This statement shows a company I've never heard of." She glanced at it and gave a thin smile. "Probably a bank error. I'll call them tomorrow and get it fixed." Then she slipped the paper out of my hand so fast I couldn't hold on to it. "Don't worry, Mom, everything's safe." I studied her face, trying to find a hint of embarrassment or remorse. Nothing. Calm, almost confident. That night I sat alone in the living room, the warm light falling on the family photos on the wall. In one frame I'm smiling between Daniel and Brianna, their hands on my shoulders. Back then, I thought I had everything. Now, looking again, all I saw was something hollow and unfamiliar. I started thinking about the old days, me and Robert working late in our tiny downtown Portland office, my hands always ink-stained while he made me coffee. We built every dollar with sweat and trust. And now, in just a few months, a young woman was taking it all piece by piece with polished charm and caring words. From that day, I paid closer attention. I quietly checked the file cabinet. Several folders were gone. Some envelopes I'd tucked away in a drawer had vanished. And the bank card? Brianna still kept it for me. I realized I no longer truly knew what was happening with my own finances. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman being pushed to the edge of her own life. Not by shouting or force, but by sweetness, by words so gentle they numbed my defenses. That's when I began to understand. Not everyone who takes from you breaks in through the door. Some walk in with a smile and a warm "Mom." And only when it's too late do you see they didn't come to love you, they came to take your place in your own home. Nothing special happened that morning. The Oregon sky was a rare, clear blue after days of rain, the first rays slipping through the curtains onto the polished wood floor. I made coffee like usual, turned on the local radio, and heard about a traffic jam on the Morrison Bridge. Everything was normal until something felt very wrong. A low restlessness pressed in my chest, like someone whispering that I had to go somewhere, right now. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the fatigue of age. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became, a quiet, stubborn call. I set down my cup, grabbed my keys. Maybe I just need some air, I told myself. No makeup, no change of clothes, just my gray cardigan and the soft-soled, worn shoes I wear to the market. I didn't know where I was going, but my hand had already turned the key and started the old Subaru. Instinct took me to the Maple Street branch, the small bank where Robert and I had saved for more than 40 years. That place held so many memories. Opening our first account after the wedding, Robert's big smile when we finally paid off the house, the day I set a new passbook on the desk and said, "We did it." I parked beside the row of maples just turning yellow. Sunlight flashed on the building's large glass, reflecting my shadow on the pavement. I stepped out, pulled my sweater tight, and felt a cool breeze slip through my hair. It was so quiet I could hear twigs snapping under my heels. The glass door opened. The air smelled faintly of coffee and freshly printed paper. Everything was just as I remembered. The light wood reception desk, the carefully vacuumed blue carpet, and the photo behind the counter, serving our community since 1974. But within seconds, I knew something was wrong. At the far end by the branch manager's desk stood a woman, and I'd know that posture anywhere: Brianna. She wore an elegant cream suit, blonde hair pinned high, makeup flawless enough to erase any trace of fatigue. Beside her stood Mr. Jenkins, the branch manager who sent flowers when Robert passed. He was bent over a thick file Brianna had set down, while she spoke in a voice that was soft, confident, completely composed. I stopped behind the stone column near the entrance, not ready to say hello. From there, I heard every word Brianna said. "Mrs. Marjorie Hale is no longer able to manage her finances," she said softly but clearly. "Her physician has confirmed progressive cognitive decline, so we just want to finalize legal guardianship. It's all in her best interest." It felt like someone yanked the rug from under me. My breath caught. For a moment, I didn't know if I was awake or dreaming. Mrs. Marjorie Hale, my own name, echoed through the familiar lobby like they were talking about someone dead. Brianna went on, even offering a polite smile. "Here's a copy of the medical record. Dr. Whitmore confirms mild dementia and recommends limiting independent financial activity." I watched her open the file and hand it to Mr. Jenkins. White paper, a round red stamp, a sloppy signature. Even from a distance I could read the first line: "Patient, Marjorie Hale, 69 years old." I went numb. That was my name, my age, and they were twisting my life. In that moment, the pieces of the last few months snapped into place like a cruel puzzle. No mail at home, a new bank card, rescheduled appointments, And now this paper, the final piece I didn't want to see. A cold ache spread through me. I felt like I wasn't standing on the floor anymore, like I was watching from above as my daughter-in-law, the one who called me Mom, calmly erased me from my own life. Brianna kept talking in that steady, administrative tone. We don't want the accounts to be abused. She's forgetful at times. This is just to protect my mother-in-law. Protect. She said it with pity, and I heard the sweet poison in her words. I looked around. A few customers sat waiting, no one paying attention. Only me, the person truly on trial without being in the courtroom. I wanted to step out and shout that I was lucid, that this was fraud, that Dr. Whitmore didn't exist. But my feet felt nailed to the floor. My hand trembled. I gripped my pocket to steady it. I heard Mr. Jenkins's voice. I understand, Miss Brianna. We just need to verify a few details before we transfer authority. I closed my eyes for a second. A flash Robert's gentle smile in our small kitchen years ago. Never let anyone else hold the title to what you've built. I opened my eyes, took a breath, and felt anger rise steady, no longer afraid. For the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely. I tightened my grip on my purse and walked toward the desk. My heels struck the tile in firm beats. A few people turned. Brianna kept talking, unaware I was almost there. I had only one thought. If she could write me out of my own story, then right here where she chose to bury me, she would face the truth. So I took one more step, ready for the confrontation that, I later realized, changed everything. The air in the lobby felt thick. I stood at the entry, inhaled, squared my shoulders, and moved forward. My steps weren't just footsteps, they were the start of a fight. Heads lifted, conversations stopped. Morning light flashed on the glass, throwing a long shadow of me across the stone floor. Brianna stood by the manager's desk, still holding the pen she'd just used. At the sound of my steps, she flinched and turned. For a split second, her face froze, then melted into a flimsy smile to hide the panic. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Her voice was dry and strained, like she was trying not to choke. The branch manager, Mr. Jenkins, looked unsettled. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Mrs. Hale, I thought you weren't able to." I stopped at the desk and looked straight at Brianna. "You might want to say that again, Brianna," I said slowly. "The incompetent person you just described to him, she's standing right in front of you." The room went rigid. A few people in the waiting area looked up, holding their breath. Brianna clutched the edge of the desk, her eyes drifting for a beat. "Mom, Quiet." I didn't raise my voice, but the tone silenced her. I held out my hand, voice like steel. "Give me the file you just submitted." "Mr." Jenkins hesitated, but my eyes didn't leave room for refusal. He handed it over. The paper was warm, still smelling of fresh ink. I opened it and read. It didn't take long. The flaws jumped out in seconds. My signature sloppy, tentative strokes, a smeared red stamp. The line, "Physician, Dr. Andrew Whitmore," tightened my jaw. I did accounting for decades, read hundreds of legal files. I knew that stamp wasn't from any real medical board. I looked up, set the file on the desk, and turned it so Mr. Jenkins could see. "These papers are fake. The stamp uses the wrong font. This doctor doesn't have a license in Oregon. And this signature," I tapped the first page, "is not mine." "Mr." Jenkins frowned and took a closer look. His face shifted from surprise to displeasure. Brianna stood her ground, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're misunderstanding, Mom. I just wanted to keep your money safe. You've been forgetful, and I was afraid someone might take advantage." I cut in, low, and clipped. "Protect me?" With forged medical records, a forged signature, and a plan to declare me incompetent so you could take it all? She blanched, stepping back half a pace. No, I wasn't trying to. I took out my phone, started recording, letting the beep sound aloud. Mr. Jenkins, I said, eyes still on Brianna. Please confirm who submitted this file this morning? He hesitated, then answered. Miss Brianna Hale. You weren't present. Good. I turned to Brianna. Everything you say from now on is on record. I won't let anyone rewrite my story. She swallowed and tried to steady herself, but her voice shook. Please stop, Mom. You're making everyone misunderstand. I was only trying to help. I cut in sharp as a thin blade. You weren't helping. You were taking. You erased me from my own life and planned to stand in my place. She inhaled hard, then tried to swing back. You're embarrassing the family. People will think I'm a terrible person. I met her eyes, cool. No need to think. Now they know. A murmur spread through the lobby. Tellers pretended to work but kept glancing over. Mr. Jenkins motioned to a staffer, likely to call legal. I stood tall, eyes never leaving Brianna. I want every one of my accounts frozen immediately, including any joint accounts with her name. And Mr. Jenkins, please prepare a written incident record. I'll sign and take a copy for my attorney. He nodded, face grave. We'll take care of it right away, Mrs. Hale. I heard the rapid clacking of keys, then a printer. Brianna sank into a chair, chalk white. She forced out a weak line. You'll regret this. You're tearing this family apart. I answered, low and measured. No, Brianna. Truth doesn't destroy a family. Only lies laid as its foundation do. She broke into tears. Not out of remorse I knew too well, but out of fear. Fear of what she couldn't control anymore. Mr. Jenkins handed me the file stamped for temporary hold, his tone formal. You can take this to your lawyer. We'll send the originals to Regional for legal review. I took it and tucked it neatly away. Then I looked at Brianna one last time. She stared down, shoulders shaking, blonde hair covering half her face. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was cold, clean, and hard as metal. I said, softly, just for the two of them to hear. I let you into my home. I gave you chances. I trusted you. And you paid me back with a careful betrayal. But you forgot something, Brianna. I don't quit when I'm underestimated. I turned to Mr. Jenkins with a faint smile. Thank you. I think I've taken enough of your time. He nodded and stepped back. I turned and walked out. Each step was slow, steady. Behind me, Brianna's hoarse voice rose. You can't do this. I'm the only one taking care of you. I stopped at the threshold without looking back and said quietly, if that's your idea of care, I'll take care of myself. The glass doors slid open and the wind rushed in. The noon sun was bright enough to sting. I squinted, but inside I'd never seen more clearly. The breeze lifted the hem of my gray sweater like a flag just raised. I drew a long breath, the crisp autumn air filling my chest. In the car window's reflection, my face looked older, maybe, but my eyes weren't weak. I was still the woman who'd weathered enough storms to know that some battles you don't choose, but once you're pushed into them, you win. I opened the door and glanced back in the rear view. Brianna stood there, small in the reflected light. I lifted one corner of my mouth, not from joy, but because her mask had finally fallen. When the engine started, it blended with the wind. What happened in that lobby wasn't just a counterpunch. It was the beginning of a fight, one with no room for mercy. As I turned onto Maple Street, sun filtered through blazing maples onto the steering wheel, and I whispered a promise to myself. From today on, no one writes my life for me. When I pulled into the driveway, the late afternoon sun was fading. Maple Street was as calm as if nothing had happened. Inside me, everything had shifted. I turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, hands still wrapped around the wheel. From a distance, I saw a figure on the porch. Daniel, my son. He stood, with his arms crossed, face set like he was bracing for a storm. The door opened, and there was Brianna on the sofa, eyes red, tissue in hand. Months ago, I might have softened at the sight. Now, it looked like a clumsy play. I walked in and set my bag down. The house was so quiet it felt heavy. No one spoke for several seconds. Only the clock ticked, and my heart beat slow and steady. Daniel spoke first, trying to steady his voice, but I heard the wobble. "Mom, I think you're misunderstanding. Brianna, she only wants what's best for you." I looked at my son for a long time. Those eyes once filled me with pride. Now they hurt. "What's best for me?" I asked softly but firmly. I took the file from my bag and set it on the coffee table. The dry thud echoed in the still room. "Is forging my signature what's best?" Brianna let out a small sob, fists clenched at her skirt like she was the victim. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. His eyes dodged mine, unable to hold my gaze. In them I saw not just confusion, but fear of losing the fragile comfort he was clinging to. "Mom," he said slowly, his voice fading. "She just thought you needed help. She didn't mean to." I cut him off, my voice lower, but so cold it even chilled me. "Didn't mean to?" "She brought forged papers to the bank, said I'm no longer competent, and signed my name on a power of attorney form. You call that didn't mean to, Daniel?" No one answered. Brianna lowered her face, tears running down her cheeks, but I knew she wasn't crying out of remorse. She was performing, and the only audience she needed to convince was Daniel. I turned to my son, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Do you know what they told me this morning? That she's no longer capable of managing her finances, that I need a legal guardian." Daniel clenched his fists but still said, "Nothing." "What does your silence mean, Daniel?" I asked, my voice starting to shake with anger. "Do you agree with her? Do you think I've actually lost my mind?" He looked up, pain in his eyes. "No, Mom, I don't think that. But you know, lately you've been forgetting things, misplacing papers, mixing up appointment dates. Brianna's just worried." I let out a dry laugh, the sound slicing through the room like a knife. "Worried? She rescheduled my appointments without asking. She keeps my bank card, opens my email, intercepts my mail, and now she wants full control of my assets. You think that's worry, Daniel?" The air in the house sank. I glanced around the kitchen behind us, still had breakfast dishes in the sink, the faint smell of coffee lingering. The heart of the home, once warm with laughter, had turned into a cold battlefield. I looked at Daniel, slow and aching. "Do you know what hurts me most?" He didn't answer. I nodded slightly. "It's not that Brianna deceived me. It's that you let her. You didn't protect me." "You protected the person who's hurting me?" Daniel closed his eyes as if my words hit harder than any blow. Brianna sobbed louder, grabbing for her husband's hand. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't want it to end up like this." I looked at her, my voice hoarse from holding back. "Don't apologize to him." "Apologize to yourself for forgetting what integrity is worth." Daniel stood, took a deep breath, and shoved his hands into his pockets. He avoided my eyes, staring out the window where the late afternoon sun lit up the row of blazing red maples. "I need to step outside," he said quietly. "Good," I replied. "You should, because in here, I need air to breathe." He nodded without looking at me and walked out. The front door closed so softly it was almost silent, but the sound still left me hollow. I stood in the living room, staring at the two half-finished teacups on the table, one mine, one Brianna's. The tea had gone cold, the surface darkening into a dull brown stain. That small scene made the truth plain. Not everything breaks with a sound. Some things shatter in silence. I gathered the documents, stacked them neatly on the table, and turned away. Behind me, Brianna still sat with her head bowed, shoulders trembling. I felt no pity anymore. I knew Daniel's silence wasn't just weakness. It was a choice, a cruel choice between two women, his wife and his mother, and he chose the one who knows how to play fragile instead of the one who raised him. As the last light of day slid across the floor, I stood in the kitchen where my family's laughter once echoed. Now, there was only the sound of wind slipping through the doorframe. I poured a glass of water, my hand trembled slightly, but my eyes were dry. I understood that some wounds can't be healed with tears. Some losses don't come from death, but from the moment someone turns their back on the truth. And that afternoon, when Daniel walked out without looking back, I knew from now on I could only rely on myself. What do you think? What happens when the person you trust most is the very one who forces you to become stronger than you thought you could be? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was still, with only the clock ticking in dry, steady beats, like time scratching at my chest. I sat by the window, looking out at the front yard where the streetlight spilled onto a thin crust of thawed snow. The quiet wasn't peace, it was the pause before a storm. Outside, the wind hissed softly through the maples. I wrapped a wool scarf tighter and stared at the home I'd lived in for more than 40 years. Every corner, every photo on the wall, every teacup with an old lipstick stain witnesses to a life of hard work and honesty. And yet in just for months, it could all be erased by a forged paper and a few lies. I let out a smile without joy. If Brianna thought I'd sit still and lose, she was badly mistaken. I stood and walked to the wooden cabinet by the dining room where Robert kept an old safe. No one knew what was inside, not even Daniel. I knelt and wiped the dust from the dial. The numbers had faded, but my hands remembered the sequence muscle memory carved by years. A soft click sounded as the lock released. Inside were a few old notebooks, a velvet box with Robert's wedding ring, and a small black USB drive. I picked it up, my palm cold. This was the key to everything Robert and I had built: shares in the old logistics company, investment certificates, and even the hidden accounts Robert used to call for emergencies. When he died, I had planned to seal it all away, but now that my daughter-in-law wanted to erase me from my own life, the emergency had arrived. I sat down, plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen lit up and folders appeared one by one: Hale Holdings, Maple Street Property, Trust Account, Nora, all intact. I opened each file, skimming numbers, e-signatures, and stock transactions only Robert and I knew. Every line was now a weapon. I opened my notebook and wrote a list of what to do. 1. Check the status of shares at Hale Holdings. 2. Freeze all joint accounts. 3. Transfer temporary control to the attorney. 4. Compile evidence of forgery. By the last line, my pen shook. Not from fear, but from loneliness. The only person I could trust now was Pauline, the attorney who'd worked with us for over 20 years. I reached for my phone and checked the time. It was close to 11 p.m., but I knew she would be awake. Pauline never sleeps early. After 3 rings, she picked up. Her voice was steady and low, even at that hour. "Marjorie, calling this late, what happened?" I took a breath and told her everything. Every detail: the bank incident, the fake documents, Daniel's silence, Brianna's tears. I left nothing out, and on the other end, Pauline listened without interrupting. Now and then I heard the light scratch of her pen. When I finished, her voice came back, calm but firm. "I know you're strong enough not to break, but right now, the most important thing is not to react loudly. Let them believe you're weak." I frowned. "You want me to pretend?" "Not pretend," Pauline said. "Strategy. The quieter you are, the more careless they'll be. You need time to gather proof and prepare a counterclaim. I'll recheck Robert's paperwork, especially the hidden accounts no one knows about. We'll make sure they never see it coming." I sat quietly for a while, looking out the window where the moonlight reflected on the glass. Her words warmed me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. "Pauline," I said softly, "thank you. But I don't want to only defend. I want accountability. "And you'll have it," she said. "First, let me secure everything legally. Tomorrow I'll send you a temporary authorization form. Sign and return it. Tonight, start archiving anything suspicious." "You did accounting, you know how." I smiled. "Yes, I did. Recordings, photos, saving every detail, every email, every line on a statement, every conversation. Nothing would slip past me again." After we hung up, I sat a long time. The lamp cast a pool of gold over the papers, my shadow stretched across the table. The room was silent except for the clock and the wind under the door. I felt a strange strength rising, not anger, but clarity. I opened a drawer and took out the small recorder Robert used in meetings. I replaced the batteries and tested it. 1, 2, 3. My voice sounded clear and steady. I slipped it into my pocket with my phone. Before bed, I opened the laptop again and created a new folder. I named it Aurora because Robert used to call me that whenever he said, "You shine brightest when cornered by darkness." I locked the USB back in the safe, turned the dial, and heard the familiar click. Then I stood and looked around the dim room. Everything looked the same, but I knew that from tonight on, every step I took would have purpose. Brianna thinks I'm just a frail old woman. Daniel thinks I'll endure in silence. Neither understands that when a mother is betrayed, what she loses isn't trust, it's mercy. And when the first morning light touched the window, I was ready for the quiet war. I was about to start not with shouting, but with evidence, numbers, and recordings sharp enough to cut. That night, I sat and watched the sunrise, whispering a promise only I could hear. I will take back everything with silence, sharper than a blade. The next morning, a veil of fog hung over the sky. I was at the kitchen table pretending to read the paper when I heard Brianna's car pull up hard out front. Her heels hammered down the hallway. The door flew open so fast the picture frames rattled. She stormed in, face tight with anger, eyes red from no sleep. "What did you do to the secondary account?" she snapped, the sweetness gone. "The bank says my access is suspended. They said it was on your orders." I folded the paper, looked up calmly as if I had no idea. "Oh? Maybe it's a security audit. They're careful these days." Brianna let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Don't play dumb, Mom. I know exactly what you're doing. You want to cut me out?" I only shrugged and didn't answer. A spark of rage flashed in her eyes. She spun and shouted, "Daniel, get down here now!" A few seconds later, my son came down the stairs, face tired, dark circles under his eyes. "What's going on?" Brianna turned, and the tears turned on like a switch. "Your mom locked all the accounts, even our savings. I can't pay the insurance or Nora's tuition. She's punishing me!" Daniel frowned and looked at me, wary and conciliatory at once. "Mom, is that true? Why didn't you tell us first?" I answered evenly. "That account is in my name. I'm protecting my own money." Brianna burst into tears, covering her face. "See, Daniel? I told you. Your mom never trusted me. She thinks I'm a thief in this house." She turned to him, voice trembling but edged like a blade. "Do something. If she doesn't hand over control, we have nothing. This house, even that little company you're working at, it's all in her name. If she changes the will, we lose everything." I watched them in silence like an outsider. Daniel hesitated, twisting the hem of his shirt. He wasn't cruel enough to take my side, and not brave enough to stand up to his wife. Seeing him falter, Brianna stepped closer, tears streaming, her voice cutting. "What about Nora? She needs a future, stability. Your mom grips everything like we're outsiders. If you don't make her sign the power of attorney again, don't blame me for doing what you won't like." I recognized the threat instantly. It wasn't the first time I'd seen her use tears to manipulate. But this time I didn't feel pain, only the clarity of watching her slide deeper into the trap she set. Daniel dropped his gaze, voice small. "I'll talk to Mom." "But Brianna, don't make this worse." She inhaled sharply and nodded, but triumph flickered in her eyes. I said nothing. I simply stood and went to my study. Behind me, their voices faded and then stopped. I closed the door, leaned back in my chair, and woke my computer. On the desk, my phone lit up with a system alert. Interior cameras restored. I smiled to myself. No one knew that last week I'd asked Pauline to contact Robert's old tech to restore the entire security system, the one Brianna had accidentally disconnected. Now every corner of the house could capture every conversation, gesture, and glance. I opened the playback and selected the last hour. On screen, Brianna sat close to Daniel in the living room, her voice tight, her face twisted with anger. You have to make her sign the trust again. Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours. After that, we do what we want. I paused the frame, scrubbed back, and played it again, listening to each word clearly. This house will be ours. I leaned back and drew a long breath. My heart pounded not from shock, but from certainty. Everything stood naked now. She wasn't pretending to be the dutiful daughter-in-law anymore. I saved the video as Brianna Proof 1. Then I opened the kitchen camera, their conversation afterward. Daniel sat with his head down while she stood close, voice low. If you won't do it, I'll tell the lawyer she needs guardianship. Once the medical file goes in, she won't be able to fight. I paused again. My hand trembled slightly, but my eyes were brighter than ever. There was no room left for doubt or hope that they'd realize their mistake. The part of me that pitied them died the second I heard, "This house will be ours." I moved the cursor to cloud backup. Pauline had set up a private encrypted drive for me. Every piece of evidence would be mirrored there, safe and untouchable. I sat watching the screen for a long time. The pain was gone. All that remained was the stillness of someone who has seen the truth to the end. What I felt now was resolve cold and precise, like a surgeon's blade. Robert used to say, "When they think you're weak, that's when you're strongest." I smiled a little. Yes, right now they think I'm weak, alone, and beaten. That certainty will be what breaks them. I jotted a note. October 14th, 8:42 a.m. Brianna threatens Daniel. Quote, "Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours." I closed the notebook and set down the pen. Outside, gray clouds gathered and wind scraped the window like a warning. But inside me, the wind had changed. When I stepped out of the room, Brianna was in the hallway pretending to wipe tears. She looked at me with a strained smile. "Mom, can we talk?" I tilted my head and answered softly, almost flat. "Of course, but this time I'll be the one listening, and you should choose every word carefully." She froze for a moment, and in her eyes I saw for the first time a flicker of real fear. I kept walking down the stairs, my legs steadier than ever. In my head, the plan was set. No need to shout, no need to strike back with anger. I only needed the truth, and I had it in my hands. Outside, the sky was turning a deep gray. A storm was coming, but this time, I would be the one holding the eye. And when it passed, only the liars would be swept away. I've always believed every storm has its time, and that Sunday night was exactly when it needed to break. I chose dinner as usual. The meal was set out at 7 o'clock, just like all the years since Robert was alive. On the table was the beef stew Daniel loves, and the apple pie Nora always asks for seconds of. I arranged everything as if nothing were out of the ordinary. At first, the atmosphere was calm. Brianna forced a smile, Daniel tried to look composed, and I stayed quiet, slowly pouring water into the glasses. The kitchen lights cast a soft yellow glow warm enough to hide the ice underneath. I heard spoons touch plates, thin laughter mixed with strain. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for me to begin. When Daniel set down his knife, I spoke gently, my voice so even it surprised me. "This is a good meal. I'm glad we're all sitting together again." Brianna smiled, tight and brittle. "Yes, I think we should forget the past and start over." I tilted my head at her, a smile that didn't reach my staying eyes. I think so too. But before we start over, there's a small thing I want you both to hear. The room went still. I reached into my handbag on the chair and took out my phone. In a few seconds, the screen's light reflected on their faces. I opened the folder. I'd prepared the file named Brianna Proof 1. I set the phone in the middle of the table and pressed play. Brianna's voice rang out clear, cold, filling the small kitchen like a sentence being read. You have to make her sign the trust again. Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours. The air froze. Daniel stared at the phone screen, his lips parting without sound. Brianna went pale, eyes wide, hands stiff on her lap. A few seconds later, she let out a sharp, brittle laugh, trying to steady herself. Mom, are you serious? I was just joking. Who would actually say something like that? I didn't answer. I stopped that recording and played the second one. This time it was her threatening Daniel, voice low and controlled. If you won't do it, I'll tell the lawyer she needs guardianship. Once the medical file goes in, she won't be able to fight. I paused and looked straight at Brianna. Also a joke? No one laughed. Daniel sat frozen, hands on the table, his face bone white. I watched his eyes flick between me and his wife, like someone waking up in the middle of a nightmare. I opened my bag and pulled out a thick folder. The cover had the bank's logo, Belmont Branch, and a legal verification seal. I set it neatly in the center of the table, my voice soft but clear. This is the bank's verification. Every document Brianna filed the other day. Fake medical forms, forged signatures, invalid seals. All confirmed as forgery. I slid the folder toward them. The paper skimmed across the wood with a small sound that felt heavy as stone. Daniel's hands shook as he opened the pages, eyes moving over the red stamps, the words, "Forgery identified." His hands trembled, then stopped at the signature line. "Oh God," he whispered. "Is this real?" I answered evenly. "Real." And if I hadn't gone to the bank that day, she would have succeeded. Brianna shot to her feet, voice catching. "No, I wasn't trying to take anything. I just wanted to help you. You've been forgetting things. I was scared." "Scared?" I cut in, eyes fixed on her. "You weren't scared of me being weak, Brianna. You were scared I was still clear." She stood frozen, then tears spilled over. Daniel still hadn't lifted his head. His hands covered his face. The kitchen was dead quiet. The only sound the clock ticking on the wall, keeping time for a funeral march. I looked at my son. For the first time, he seemed small, not in age, but under the weight of shame. "Son," I said softly, "you once promised you wouldn't let anyone hurt me. But today, you sat still and watched it happen." Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He only bowed his head, voice breaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away." I gave a small nod, then turned to Brianna. She had collapsed into the chair, shoulders shaking. All that was left of her now was smeared makeup and raw fear. I spoke, light but sharp as a thin blade. "I'm not crazy, Brianna. I'm more awake than you think." It was like the oxygen disappeared. The words rang out, spread through the kitchen, and fell onto the cold tile like a bell ending the service. I pulled out my chair and sat again, carefully stacking the papers, the recordings, the confirmations. My voice stayed even, not loud, not soft, just enough. All of this is stored legally. One copy at my attorney's office, one in a secure drive. I don't need to shout, and I don't need to beg anyone to believe me. The truth knows how to speak for itself. Daniel was silent for a long time. Finally, he lifted his head, eyes red, and murmured, "I didn't think. Brianna, why did you do it?" Brianna looked at him, sobbing. I was afraid of losing everything." "Your mom never shares. She always acts like she's the only one who's right. I just wanted a little control, a little security." I looked at her and sighed. "Security? "You can't build security on lies, Brianna. You can buy comfort, but you can't buy back trust once it's gone." She dropped her head and cried like a child. Daniel just sat there, eyes empty, hands limp. I stood and gathered the papers, my voice barely more than a breeze. "I won't call the police tonight. But tomorrow morning, I'll be with my attorney. I can't live with you two for one more day." No one stopped me. Only Brianna's muffled sobs trailed behind. I walked to the sink, laid my hand on the cold stone, and looked out the window. Beyond it was the garden Robert used to tend, now swallowed by the dark. In the glass, I saw my face older, harder, but no longer trembling. Behind me, I heard Daniel say softly, like someone who'd just lost something precious, "Mom, I don't know what to say." I turned back and smiled, light as air. "Then don't say anything. Just listen." I walked slowly toward the door and stopped at the threshold. "I spent my life teaching you right from wrong, but in the end, you made me do the opposite, teach someone else a lesson in honesty, and you're going to witness it." I didn't look back. I went straight up the stairs, leaving behind a kitchen that had once been warm, now thick with the smell of cold food and dense silence. At the top step, I heard Daniel call out, voice tight with tears, "Mom, I'm sorry." I stopped without turning and spoke quietly, steady but firm. "I know, but sorry isn't an end. It's just the start of waking up." Then I kept going, step by steady step, like someone who had just crossed the threshold of the past and was walking straight into the light of truth. On the morning of the trial, a light rain fell. I went to the Belmont County Courthouse with Pauline, the friend and attorney, who'd stood by me these past months. She opened a black umbrella, covering half of me from the gray drizzle. The air carried the metallic chill of iron, just like my mood, hard, with no room for mercy. The courthouse grounds were unusually crowded. A few local reporters stood outside, taking notes and photos. News of the inheritance fraud case where a mother was betrayed by her daughter-in-law had spread over the past few days, drawing curiosity. I didn't look at them. I walked slowly, my old black shoes hitting the stone steps in solid, certain taps. Pauline laid a hand on my shoulder, her voice low and firm. "You made it here, Marjorie. Now let justice speak." I nodded. In my hands was a thick file, every piece of evidence, from recordings and videos to bank statements, numbered and neatly sealed. Each page was the result of sleepless nights under a warm lamp, writing down every small detail. When we entered the courtroom, Brianna was already there. She sat beside her own attorney, hair perfectly styled, makeup meticulous, but her eyes couldn't hide the panic. Daniel sat behind her, not at her table. My son's face was gaunt, like he'd aged 10 years in a few weeks. The judge was Eleanor Fitch, a woman around 60, stern but fair. When she struck the gavel, the sound split the room in two, truth on one side, lies on the other. Pauline stood and spoke briefly but sharply. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Marjorie Hale, was exploited and deceived by her own daughter-in-law, Brianna Hale. This individual forged medical records and signatures and used my client's bank accounts to attempt to seize her assets, in clear violation of elder protection laws and financial fraud statutes." I sat still, eyes on the bench, not looking at Brianna, but I heard her quick, shallow breaths, and I felt a tightness in my chest. Not pity, regret for someone who destroyed herself with ambition. Brianna's attorney stood, talking fast, trying to sound calm. "Your Honor, my client acted out of genuine concern. She believed her mother-in-law was experiencing cognitive issues and simply wanted to manage finances to avoid risk. This was a misunderstanding. There was no intent to steal." Pauline gave a faint smile, the kind that belongs to someone who already knows she'll win. She opened her case and set a small USB drive on the evidence table. "If it was a misunderstanding, then let the court hear my opposing party's own voice." The room went silent. When the recording played, every word cut the air like a blade. "You have to make her sign the trust again. Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours." Brianna's voice filled the courtroom, clear, cold, precise. No one spoke, only the sound of rain at the windows. Judge Eleanor raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. Pauline played the second clip, Brianna's threat to Daniel. "If you won't do it, I'll tell the lawyer she needs guardianship. Once the medical file goes in, she won't be able to fight." When it ended, there was nothing left to say. Brianna sat frozen, hands clasped together, shaking. The judge looked at her, voice stern. "Miss Hale, is that your voice?" Brianna swallowed hard, lips trembling. I don't remember." "Maybe someone edited," Eleanor cut in, firm. "Forensic audio confirms no edits. The voice is a 100% match. Do you have anything else to add?" No reply. Brianna bowed her head, shoulders curling like the air had doubled in weight. Pauline submitted more verified bank documents, statements, confirmation of forged signatures, and a report from the real physician who stated he never signed any diagnosis of cognitive impairment. Everything laid out precise, airtight. The judge reviewed each page, eyes cold as steel. Finally, she set the stack down and looked straight at Brianna. "These actions are not only civil violations, they are criminal. You intentionally forged documents, exploited an elderly person, and violated property rights." It landed like a second hammer blow. Brianna broke into sobs, crumpling into her chair, hands over her face. Daniel, sitting behind, stood. He walked forward slowly, voice unsteady but clear. "Your Honor, may I speak? I'm Mrs. Marjorie Hale's son." I stayed silent too long. I knew my wife was wrong, and I didn't stop her. "I accept responsibility for my cowardice, and I apologize to my mother." He bowed deeply, voice tight. I looked at my son, and my heart twisted. The hurt, the betrayal, the anger in me seemed to melt for a moment, leaving only fatigue and a gentle sadness, like a damp cloth laid over my heart. The judge nodded, voice softer but still firm. "An apology is a good beginning, but justice must still be served." She lifted the gavel and struck it 3 clean times. "The court orders all of Mrs. Marjorie Hale's assets and accounts are to be restored. All related transactions are frozen and under investigation. The defendant, Brianna Hale, is charged with forgery and financial abuse of an elder. Court is adjourned." The sound echoed through the room. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from joy relief. Something heavy in me, after months of strain, was finally set down. As people rose, I stood and walked slowly into the hallway. My heels tapped evenly on the stone floor. Cold air swept in from the big door, carrying the smell of rain, the scent of freedom. Daniel caught up and walked beside me. He didn't speak, just walked, his hands clenching and unclenching. At last he said, low and hoarse, "Mom, I'll take care of Nora, and I'll fix what I broke." I stopped and looked at him. "You don't need to fix the past, Daniel. Live so Nora doesn't have to repeat it." He nodded, eyes wet. Brianna was led out of the courtroom, hands shaking, face drained. She glanced back, lost. I didn't look at her. I turned away and stepped out the big door. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were thinning, and late sunlight angled through the wet leaves. I drew a deep breath, my chest lighter than it had been in months. Pauline came out and gently took my hand. Justice was late, but it came. I smiled, eyes on the end of the rain-wet street. Yes, some wounds don't need revenge, only proof that we were right. I walked down the courthouse steps, the wind tossing my silver hair. Traffic hummed in the distance, life falling back into its ordinary rhythm. And in the middle of it, I no longer felt like a victim. I was a survivor, standing steady in the wreckage, carrying the calm of someone who had won herself back. That day, for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I felt only freedom, the kind no one can ever sign away again. 2 weeks after the trial, on a late afternoon with sunlight spilling gold across the lawn, I heard a gentle knock. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there thinner, eyes hollow, his shirt wrinkled like he'd walked out of a storm that wouldn't end. He was quiet for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "Mom, can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside, letting him into the small lakeside house I'd just moved into. It was peaceful here, only a 10-minute drive from town, but just far enough to breathe without the past chasing you. Daniel sat down, hands locked together, unsure where to begin. After a while, he said, "Mom, I know it's over, but I can't live with myself if I don't say this." I sat across from him, waiting. He took a breath, voice shaking but honest. "I was manipulated, Mom. Brianna knew how to make me feel guilty, to make me believe that if I didn't take her side, I was a bad husband, a bad father. I didn't see that I was losing you piece by piece. I looked at my son, and I wasn't angry anymore. Just a soft sadness, like wind across the water." I spoke quietly, slow as breathing. "No one controls a person with a conscience, Daniel. They only use your silence. And you let silence speak for you for too long." He bowed his head, his knuckles whitening. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. I just hope you'll let me be your son again." I stood, walked to him, and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You've always been my son. Sometimes we have to walk through loss to see who's truly still there." His eyes filled. When he left, I watched until his car disappeared behind the trees along the shore. Relief spread through me, not because I'd forgiven, but because I no longer carried resentment. I started over at 70. This little house by the lake used to be the getaway Robert and I bought back in the 80s. Now it's truly home. Every morning I wake before the sun has time to slip through the curtains. I roll out my yoga mat in the living room, breathe deep, and feel the cool air on my skin. Some mornings, the lake lies under a light veil of fog. I sit by the window with a cup of peppermint tea and turn the pages of a book. The only sounds are sparrows calling on the porch and the whisper of wind through the curtains. That feeling quiet, whole, completely free was something I never truly had in all those years of being a wife, a mother, a woman who endured. I planted a small garden by the porch, yellow daisies, lavender, and a few white roses Robert always loved. I tend them daily and talk to them like old friends. Sometimes I think, if flowers had souls, they'd understand me better than the people I once lived with. In the afternoon, I walk the lakeshore with a small notebook to capture stray thoughts, quotes, old memories, things I want to leave for Sophie, the one grandchild I fully trust. Sophie visits every weekend. She's 12, hair the color of honey, eyes as clear as the lake out front. Every time Daniel's car stops, she jumps out and shouts, "Grandma, my hero." I laugh and open my arms. She hugs me tight, the scent of apple shampoo in her hair making my throat catch. In her eyes there's no pity, only pride, as if I'd stepped out of a fairy tale where the hero is an old woman. That afternoon we sat on the porch. Sophie bit into a slice of my fresh apple pie and asked, "Grandma, why aren't you mad at Dad anymore? He looks so sad." I smoothed her hair and smiled. "Anger only wears you out, sweetheart. Some people aren't bad, they're weak, and sometimes the best thing we can do is refuse to be weak with them." Sophie thought for a moment, then looked up. "Grandma, I'm scared that when I grow up, people won't believe me like they didn't believe you." I looked into her eyes and saw myself years ago naive, wanting to be understood, wanting to be trusted. I squeezed her hand, my voice slow but certain. "You don't need everyone to believe you. You need to believe yourself, and never let anyone speak for you, Sophie. Once you let them decide who you are, you lose your own voice." She nodded, eyes bright with understanding. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I want to be strong like you." I smiled, gentle and deep. "No, sweetheart, I'm not stronger than anyone else. I just learned that silence can be a way to fight when it walks with the truth." A soft breeze stirred, carrying a hint of lavender. I looked out at the lake, where the sunset lay like a thin sheet of silk. Peace settled in my chest. Sometimes I think of Brianna not to resent her, but to remind myself that greed and deceit always carry a price. As for me, I finally paid off the debt of blind trust. At night, I sit at my desk and write, "Happiness isn't being loved forever. It's knowing when to leave so you can keep yourself." Then I set down the pen and listen to the crickets and the faint slap of water on the shore. I smile, close my eyes, and feel the night breeze in my silver hair. My life, which once felt withered, is blooming again quietly, steadily, and brightly in its own way. And I know that when the sun rises, I'll start another day no longer afraid of losing anyone and never letting anyone speak for me again. A year after the trial, I stood on a small stage in Belmont's downtown hall beneath a new plaque gleaming with the words, "Hail Foundation for Elder Justice." It's the nonprofit I founded with the assets I reclaimed, with one purpose: to support older women who've suffered financial abuse or been stripped of control by their own families. When I lifted the microphone, faces in the audience, mostly silver-haired women like me, looked up, eyes full of understanding. Some nodded, some quietly wiped tears. I knew many of them had been called useless, too old to be heard. I wanted them to know none of us are truly weak. I spoke low and steady, each word etched into the air. People think age is a sign of weakness. In truth, we're just watching in silence. When you've lived long enough, you learn when to keep quiet and when to speak. Applause rolled through the hall like a warm wave. I smiled and turned to my side where Sophie stood. She wore a simple white dress, her eyes bright, her small hand gripping mine. I felt the warmth in that palm, the passing of the torch to a new generation, clearer and stronger. Sophie looked up and whispered, "Grandma, you're my hero." I squeezed her hand and answered softly but sure, "No, sweetheart, real heroes don't let others define them. And you'll be one of them." Late light poured through the tall windows, reflecting off the bronze plaque. For a moment, I could almost see Robert smiling somewhere, proud that I hadn't let fear decide the rest of my life. After the ceremony, I sat as the hall emptied. Outside, the sun was slipping behind the river, a pale band of orange across the horizon. I sipped tea, listened to the wind, and felt my heart light as paper. I had walked through betrayal, loss, and justice, and now there was only peace. I watched Sophie helping staff clean up and realized something simple. I hadn't just reclaimed assets. I'd reclaimed a voice my own, and for women like me. If you're still listening, thank you for walking with me to the end. I believe that wherever you are, big city or small town, you understand that justice and dignity don't have an expiration date. Tell me where you're watching from, so I'll know how far this story has traveled. And if, like me, you believe that women who stand up at any age deserve to be heard, please leave a comment, or subscribe so we can keep telling stories of courage, freedom, and stubborn love. I'm Marjorie Hale, and here's the last lesson I want to leave. Don't let anyone speak for you because your voice is the greatest power no one can take away.